LoveLore Library. Chapter 1054. Kieran nodded its big head. You too, follow me closely. Kieran felt that its words were unnecessary. Gu Xian was now following it all the time, as if it wanted to grow on its body. Kieran could almost flatten it by turning around. Kieran's mouth twitched. You don't have to follow me so closely. I'm afraid that I'll accidentally step on you. Only then did Gu Xian put some distance between them. Kieran led the way in front, Yan Ziyuan in the middle, and Gu Xian at the back. They maintained this formation and moved forward slowly. Kieran took a few steps and left a paw print on the snow. This way, Yi Feng could follow the footprints and find them. Kieran's pace was relatively large, so it unknowingly fell behind the two of them. Only the dim stars in the sky were shining faintly. Everything around them could not be seen clearly. Ah! Yan Ziyuan, who was walking in the middle, exclaimed loudly in the silent night. Kieran hurriedly turned around, only to see Gu Xian standing there in a daze. Yan Ziyuan was nowhere to be seen. What happened? Damn, where did Yan Ziyuan go? I lost a person. If Yan Ziyuan died, how could it explain to its master? Kieran hurriedly ran back, only to find that there was a huge ice crack on the ground. It was so dark that it could not see the bottom. This ice crack was originally covered by ice and snow. Yan Ziyuan happened to step on it, so it suddenly sank. Gu Xian crouched at the entrance of the cave, looking anxious. Ziyuan. Ziyuan. Are you in there? Can you hear me? Gu Xian's voice echoed in the cave, but Yan Ziyuan's words could not be heard. Kieran looked down. Although it had excellent eyesight, it could not see how deep the cave was. If Yan Ziyuan fell down, he was afraid, Kieran's head exploded. He anxiously walked around the entrance of the cave. No, it had to go down and take a look. If he was alive, it had to see him. If he was dead, it had to see his corpse. After figuring this out, the little Qilin jumped down without any hesitation. Gu Xian was left dumbstruck at the entrance of the cave. Gu Xian's face turned slightly pale as he looked down at the big hole. That pitch-black hole of unknown depth was like the huge mouth of a monster that was choosing people to devour. His beloved had fallen. He was very anxious, but he didn't have the guts to jump down. Forget it, Kieran should go down. If even Kieran couldn't find her, he wouldn't be able to either. He would only be sending himself to his death. After figuring this out, Gu Xian decided to sit beside the cave entrance. This ice crevice was not straight up and down. It was slightly sloped. After Kieran jumped down, he slid down like a whirlwind. The walls of the ice crevice were very smooth and hard. Kieran desperately scratched the walls a few times, but only left a few white marks on the walls. However, the entrance of the cave was quite narrow. Kieran couldn't extend his wings, so he could only use his telekinesis to slightly reduce the speed of his descent. There was a faint smell of Yan Ziyuan in this cave. He was sure that Yan Ziyuan had definitely fallen down, but he was not sure if she was still alive. Kieran shouted, Yan Ziyuan. Kieran. Kieran. His loud voice echoed in the cave. Kieran almost fainted from the shock. He didn't dare to shout anymore. The lower he went, the more complicated the terrain became. From time to time, there would be one or two huge rocks sticking out. Kieran was caught off guard and almost crashed into one. Fortunately, he slapped out his claws in time and used the reaction force to avoid the huge rock. He continued to roll and crawl down. Chapter 1055. The further it went down, the more frightened it became. It was such a steep slope and such a dangerous terrain. Yen Ziyuan was a weak girl. She would most likely die if she fell down like this, unless a miracle happened. Kiran felt that its heart had sunk to the bottom of a hole. Fortunately, the downward slope had eased a lot. Kiran scratched, and finally slowed down. It was pitch black in the cave. Fortunately, its beast eyes could see in the dark, so Kiran saw a fork in the road not far below. Damn, there is a fork in the road. Which one should I choose? Kiran slid down at lightning speed. Its green eyes were wide open, and it looked anxious. Its big head moved back and forth to smell. Before it could decide which side to choose, the fork in the road was right in front of it. It could not stop its momentum. It made up its mind and chose the hole on the right. Kiran shouted up, "I choose the hole on the right." Hole. 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 The sound was like thunder, echoing back and forth in the cave. Kiran had closed its ears in advance to avoid being destroyed by its own voice. Gu Ziyan was as timid as a mouse. He would not dare to jump down, and he would not dare to walk around. He must be guarding the hole at the moment. The little Chilan's voice was loud enough that it was certain that Gu Ziyan could hear it. When the reinforcements came, they would definitely choose the hole on the left. Kiran adjusted its posture as it fell. It was ready to kiss the ground at any time. Its skin was thick, so it would not be a problem for it to fall once or twice. However, it was afraid that Yen Ziyuan was at the bottom of the cave. It would be bad if she was not killed by the fall, but by the fall. Ah, right. Reinforcements. How could it forget about its master? Kiran immediately contacted Ning Xuemo while it was falling. Master, master. Ning Xuemo and Shinjiuli were also about to set out to find the ice flame flower. Ning Xuemo's heart sank when she heard Kiran's anxious voice. Before she could ask, Kiran had already shouted, "Master, Yen Ziyuan fell into the ice hole. Come and save her with the Almighty." Ning Xuemo's heart suddenly jumped. No one knew better than her how dangerous the ice holes that suddenly appeared on the ice field were. Some of the ice holes were thousands of meters long, as if they led directly to the depths of hell. If Yen Ziyuan fell into such a place with her mediocre skills, she would lose her life. Without saying another word, Ning Xuemo dashed towards the little Chilan's direction. She had already reached Earth Realm rank 5, so her telepathy with the little Chilan was already completely harmonious. She didn't need the little Chilan to report its location and could quickly locate it. Then, in the shortest time possible, she would be able to find it. Shinjiuli picked her up. "Tell me the location, I'll take you there." The Almighty's speed was naturally as fast as flying. After Ning Xuemo told him the location of Kiran, she asked Kiran, "What's going on? Weren't you waiting in the ice house built by Yifeng? How long has she fallen in?" Kiran's voice was angry. "It's all Gu Ziyan's fault, that scumbag." Gu Ziyan was like an ant on a hot pan. From time to time, he circled around the hole and kept looking at it. Suddenly, Kiran's roar came from the hole. That sound seemed to come from the core of the earth. Gu Ziyan's heart sank. How deep was this hole? Could they still come up? Chapter 1056. He thought that even if his psychokinesis was at its peak, he would not be able to get out of here. Now that he had no psychokinesis, he was just like an ordinary person. It was impossible for him to get out alone. If they could not come up, would he not be trapped here until he died? When he thought of this, his entire face turned pale. Suddenly, Kiran's roar came from the bottom of the hole, "I choose the right." Right. Right? Was there a fork in the road? Gu Ziyan subconsciously remembered the little Chilan's words. Although the sound was clear this time, it was much weaker. It could be seen how deep Kieran had fallen. It was easy to fall down, but difficult to come up. Kieran was powerful, but could it really come up from such a deep hole? If it could not come up, then he would not be able to contact Ning Shuima and the rest. His face turned even paler, but he could only wait here. Was he going to wait for death here? Was he, the Guqin saint, going to die in such a remote and desolate place? No. He could not. Thinking of that scene, Gu Xian's face turned even paler. He was almost scared out of his wits by death. He anxiously circled the hole a few times and almost slipped and fell down. What should I do? What should I do? Right. Yi Feng. Yi Feng had not fallen down yet. He could definitely bring him out of this ice field. However, if Yan Ziyuan died, Yi Feng would probably want to kill him. He would definitely not bring him along. Then he could only count on Ning Shuima and the rest. Kieran should have informed its master, right? Perhaps Ning Shuima and the rest would arrive soon. Ziyuan might not be dead yet. Gu Xian calmed down a little and began to look into the distance from time to time. He had never looked forward to the arrival of Yi Feng and Ning Shuima so much. Yi Feng walked through 3 or 4 ice valleys in a row, but the ice flame flowers were still like flowers in the water, the moon in the mirror. He could not find any clues. In the process of searching, he naturally encountered a snowstorm. This storm was unprecedentedly strong, and the sky seemed to be upside down. It was almost impossible to walk in such weather. He could only find a leeward place and hide in the gap between 2 ice rocks to avoid the snow. After the snow stopped, the surrounding scenery changed. The hillside became an ice mountain, and the ice floe became a valley. Fortunately, Yi Feng had a special ability to find his way, so he did not get lost. Originally, he wanted to continue looking for Yan Ziyuan, but in the end, he was worried about her. He was afraid that she would be worried if he didn't go back for a long time, and he was also afraid that Gu Ziyuan would cause trouble again. So after some thought, he decided to go back and take a look first. Along the way, he didn't know why, but he felt a little uneasy. The fear of losing something was like a cage that tightly wrapped around him. He simply increased his speed to the maximum and returned to the ice house in just over 2 hours. No one. Yi Feng looked around the room like a whirlwind, but he could not find anyone. What happened? Why was there no one? Did they get attacked by wild beasts? Yi Feng looked around carefully. No, it was not a wild beast attack. Everything was clean and tidy, and there were no traces of fighting. He checked the traces of their departure. The traces were neat and tidy. Obviously, they left by themselves. Did they go to look for food? If so, they should have left a mark for him. After figuring this out, Yi Feng began to carefully search for the marks that Kieran and the rest had left behind. Chapter 1057. Although there was still wind and snow blowing from time to time, covering the footprints on the ground, there were still many clues left behind. His tracking skills had always been very good, so after searching for a while, he found their marks. Based on the depth of the marks, he calculated how long they had been gone. They had been gone for less than 2 hours. With Kieran by their side, there shouldn't be any great danger. Yi Feng's worried heart finally relaxed. He followed Kieran's footprints and rushed in that direction. He was really as fast as lightning. It was fine. Maybe they were just looking for food and wouldn't encounter any monsters. Even if they did, Kieran would be able to deal with them. Yi Feng kept comforting himself in his heart, but the uneasiness in his heart was like a black shadow that kept expanding and spreading. The fear for no reason was like a spider that nibbled at him bit by bit. His heart tightened bit by bit, almost suffocating him. While he was running, his heart suddenly beat violently, as if someone had suddenly pinched it. Pain, fear, fear. Countless indescribable emotions flooded his heart. Something had happened. Sharkman's sixth sense had always been very sharp. For him to suddenly have this kind of reaction, something must have happened to Yan Ziyuan. At this time, Yifeng's speed had already exceeded the limits of his body. The wind and snow were like knives, slicing into his skin piece by piece. His exposed skin was even cut open. Bright red blood fell to the ground and instantly condensed into red beads. From afar, he saw a white figure standing in front of him, and his heart suddenly sank. That person was Gu Ziyan, but Yan Ziyuan and Kirin were nowhere to be seen. Gu Ziyan saw a black figure in the distance shooting towards them like an arrow. He was delighted. Finally, someone had come. He hurriedly waved his hand and shouted, "Yifeng, over here, over here." Yifeng appeared beside him in the blink of an eye and grabbed Gu Ziyan's collar. "Where's Ziyuan?" Gu Ziyan was lifted up like a little chick, and his face turned red. "Cough, cough, let go of me, cough, cough." As soon as Yifeng let go, Gu Ziyan fell to the side. He coughed as he pointed at the crack in the ice and said, "Ahem, Ziyuan." Ziyuan fell down. "Ahem," Kirin also jumped down. There's still no movement. Why? Yifeng looked into the crack in the ice and his head exploded. She fell into such a deep crevice by herself. He did not wait for Gu Ziyan to finish his words and jumped into the crevice. Gu Ziyan, he was stunned for a moment, then suddenly rushed to the entrance of the cave and shouted, "Kirin chose the passage on the right." Kirin chose the right passage. There was no sound coming from the cave. The cave was like a black hole, swallowing everything that entered it. Yifeng naturally heard that sentence and silently noted it down. Although he was falling at a high speed, he did not panic at all. It was as if he was on flat ground. He carefully observed the traces around him. There were a few scratch marks on the walls of the cave. Judging from the length and strength of the scratch marks, they should have been left by Kirin. Ziyuan did not have that much strength. How was Ziyuan now? Was she injured? Yifeng was burning with anxiety. But he was a rational person after all. He could control his panic and tried his best to calm down. A moment later, he saw the fork in the road from afar. He turned around and slid into the passage on the left. "Ziyuan, Ziyuan, you must stay alive. Wait for me." Chapter 1058. Gu Ziyan shouted at the entrance of the cave for a long time, but there was no response. He was so angry that his face turned red and he angrily stomped his feet. These idiots. Idiots. He had hoped for the stars and the moon for a savior, but in the end, he jumped down again. Gu Ziyan almost wanted to curse. But what else could he do? He could only obediently wait for a miracle to happen. He looked around, afraid that another monster would jump out. Right now, he was the only one here, so he didn't have any ability to resist. If a monster came, he could only be a snack. After an unknown amount of time, he suddenly heard a deep rumbling sound coming from underground. It seemed like something underground had collapsed and the ground under his feet was shaking. Gu Ziyan was standing at the edge of the ice crack and was almost shaken to the point of falling down. He was so scared that his face turned pale. He quickly took a few steps back and tripped on a piece of ice, falling down on his butt. He accidentally sat on a sharp piece of ice. It almost hit his butt. He groaned in pain and jumped up while holding his butt. He spun in a circle and his face turned pale and his body trembled. He was jumping up and down in pain when a faint white light flashed in the distance and two people appeared in front of him. He looked carefully and was overjoyed. "Madam Ning, Mr. Han, you're finally here. Quickly save Ziyuan and the others." Ning Xuema already knew the general situation from Kirin. She looked at the man in front of her and wished she could kick him down. She looked into the ice crack. It was so deep that she couldn't see the bottom. How long has it been since Yuen fell down? Is there any movement down there? She fell down almost 2 hours ago. Yifeng also went down, and Kiran, there's no news from them. There was a tremor coming from below. It seems like a cave has collapsed. Gu Xian told her everything he knew. Cave. Ning Xuema's expression became even worse. It would be a miracle if someone didn't die from falling into the ice crack. If there was another cave, she could only go down to investigate. Just as she was about to contact Kiran again, a green light flashed not far away. Kiran ran over like a whirlwind. Master! You're here. Gu Xian was dumbfounded. This Qilin clearly jumped down from this crack in the ice. Why did it run back from afar? Little Apple, cut the crap. What's the situation inside? Ning Xuema immediately asked. It's complicated. The slope was very steep, and I couldn't stop falling. There was also a fork in the road, and I chose the one on the right. Yan Ziyuan wasn't there. After I fell to the bottom, I searched for her, but there was no trace of her. She must have fallen into the hole on the left. The cave was steep and narrow, so I couldn't go back the way I came. I could only grope my way forward. It took me a lot of detours to get out. Then, did you notice that the ground was sinking? No, the path I took was very normal. It was just that when I was about to reach the exit, I felt a slight tremor. Even if the ground sank, it wasn't the path I was on. Speaking up to this point, the little Qilin's voice suddenly stopped. If it wasn't on the path it was on, then it was on the path Yan Ziyuan fell into. It turned around and wanted to jump down again. I'll go to the other hole to check. Little Apple, stay up here. Guru, let's go down. Ning Xuema ordered and stopped Kiran in his tracks. A white figure flashed in front of them. Ning Xuema pulled Shinjioli and jumped into the crack. Chapter 1059. Gu Xian was speechless. He wanted to say, since the ground has caved in, Ziyuan and Yifeng must have met with misfortune. We shouldn't waste our efforts. But before he could finish his sentence, Ning Xuema and Han Shanyue were nowhere to be seen. His heart suddenly sank. If Yan Ziyuan and Yifeng had met with misfortune down there, then Ning Xuema and Han Shanyue would probably not care about him anymore. Not to mention curing his incurable disease, he might not even be able to walk out of this ice field. His heart was filled with fear as he glanced at the little Qilin beside him. His eyes turned slightly before he suddenly knelt down and prayed loudly to the heavens, may the heavens bless and protect Ziyuan. Disciple is willing to sacrifice 10 years of his lifespan in exchange for her safety. Kiran glanced at him coldly. If this man didn't cast the twin curse on Yan Ziyuan, why would they come to this godforsaken place? Why would Yan Ziyuan fall into the ice hole and have no idea whether she was dead or alive? He was the main culprit. Kiran clenched its claws and tried to control its emotions. It didn't fly into a rage immediately. If Yan Ziyuan and Yifeng were fine, then it would forget about it. If Yan Ziyuan had met with misfortune, then it wouldn't hesitate to tear this man into pieces and feed him to the wolves. Yan Ziyuan didn't know how long she had been rolling down. The cave was dark and silent. Time seemed to have stopped here. She tried to stop herself from falling, but to no avail. She could only adjust her body while rolling. She knew some kung fu, so this kind of adjustment was very useful for her. At least she managed to avoid some protruding rocks and sharp ice. She was dizzy and had to accept her fate as she waited for the moment she reached the bottom of the cave. Fortunately, as she rolled, the slope seemed to be getting gentler. She shouldn't die from the fall. However, she was, after all, a rich young lady who had never experienced the vicissitudes of life. Although she had followed Ning Xiuoma to the snowfield and learned a lot of knowledge that she couldn't learn in the boudoir and had become bolder, she was still afraid of the dark. Coupled with the fear of the unknown in front of the inky darkness, her heart tightened into a ball as she frantically rolled around. For some reason, the first person she thought of wasn't Gu Zian, but Yi Feng. Including when she instantly fell into the hole, she subconsciously called out Yi Feng's name. She recalled the time when he rescued her from the monster's mouth. He was worried that she would be scared, so he thoughtfully covered her eyes. "Don't be scared, I'm here." With him around, she always felt at ease. But he wasn't there. Yi Feng, where are you?" "I'm so scared." She didn't know how long she had been rolling down. Maybe it was a few minutes, or maybe it was a few seconds. Just when she felt that she was about to roll into hell, a red light suddenly appeared in front of her eyes. Yan Ziyuan subconsciously closed her eyes. Then, her body suddenly stopped. It seemed like she had fallen somewhere. She fell so hard that her vision turned black and she almost fainted. I can't faint. She desperately bit her lips. That sharp pain pulled her back a little. Then, she slowly opened her eyes. After a long period of darkness, she suddenly saw light. Her vision was hazy, and then she felt that it was a red light that was almost as bright as the stars. Yan Ziyuan wanted to open her eyes to see clearly, but her vision suddenly turned black and she fainted. Blue sky, white clouds, sea, flying seagulls, beautiful shark men. Chapter 1060. Yan Ziyuan was in a daze as if she had a very long dream. In the dream, she seemed to have become a mermaid, freely swimming in the blue waves. Ziyuan, wake up! Ziyuan, wake up! After an unknown amount of time, Yan Ziyuan felt someone anxiously calling her name. Her eyelashes trembled, her fingers moved, and she finally woke up. Her vision was still a bit hazy because she had lost too much blood. She couldn't see the person in front of her clearly. In the blur, she seemed to see Yi Feng's anxious face in the red light. She reached out her hand. Yi Feng. Is that you? Did you come to save me? Am I hallucinating? Yi Feng grabbed her hand. Her hands were originally as tender as spring onions, white and soft, but now they were dripping with blood. The pink wounds were slightly open. It's me, Ziyuan, you have to hold on. Yi Feng's voice was trembling. When he arrived, Yan Ziyuan was lying in a pool of blood. She had already lost consciousness. There were many abrasions all over her body. Although the wounds weren't deep, for some reason, the blood kept flowing. In this kind of environment, any insignificant wound could be fatal. Yan Ziyuan was extremely weak now. When she saw Yi Feng, her uneasy heart finally calmed down. It was good that he came, she was safe with him here. Yan Ziyuan relaxed and fainted again. Her clothes were tattered, her face was pale and haggard. Her lips that were once as bright as flower petals were now as pale as a flower in the rain. It seemed like they could wither at any time. Yi Feng held her hand tightly. His face was even paler than Yan Ziyuan's. Yan Ziyuan and his arms seemed to have turned into Yi Yu from his previous life. Her body was covered in blood, and her body was turning cold in his arms, but he was helpless. No, he couldn't let her walk down the same path as in his previous life. No matter what, he had to make sure she was fine. He couldn't let her die in his arms again. He helped her up so that her back was facing him. Then, he placed his hands on her back to heal her injuries. Ziyuan, you must hang in there, hang in there. Yi Feng sent Sharkman's Will of Origin into Yan Ziyuan, checking her wounds and broken meridians before gently healing them, gradually, the wounds on her body began to heal and scab over. Her face was slightly flushed and her cold hands and feet began to warm up. After about an hour, Yan Ziyuan finally woke up. Her vision gradually cleared. Suddenly, she felt someone behind her. She turned her head and saw Yi Feng treating her injuries. Just as she was about to speak, Yi Feng shook his head at her, signaling her to be quiet. Yan Ziyuan then obediently maintained her cross-legged posture, allowing Yi Feng's psychokinesis to continuously flow into her body. She felt warmth all over her body, and the painful wounds from before seemed to be slowly healing. It really was him. So he really came to save her. Yan Ziyuan suddenly had the urge to cry. She didn't cry when no one responded to her when she asked for help. She didn't cry when she was alone in the dark and her life was in danger. She didn't cry when she kept falling and getting scratched. But now, when she saw Yi Feng, she felt wronged and afraid. She couldn't help but feel a lump in her throat, and tears kept welling up in her eyes. She was afraid that she would distract Yi Feng, so she forced herself to hold back her tears. Like a small stone being thrown into the water, at first it was a small ripple, but then it gradually rippled through her entire heart. There was a burst of warmth that kept washing over her. Chapter 1061. There was a burst of warmth that washed away the anxiety and fear. It was like a spring breeze in March, dispelling the darkness and bringing light. After another incense stick worth of time, Yi Feng finally stopped. He wanted to get up, but he suddenly felt powerless. He held on to the cave wall to support himself. His face was pale and his forehead was covered in sweat. It was clear that healing Yan Ziyuan had consumed a lot of his energy. Yan Ziyuan quickly got up and supported his swaying body. She asked with concern, "Are you all right?" Yi Feng closed his eyes and waited for the dizziness to pass. He had used too much of the mermaid's original telekinesis to heal all the wounds on Yan Ziyuan's body. His energy had been consumed too quickly. It was like losing a lot of blood, so dizziness was normal. He opened his eyes again and saw Yan Ziyuan's bright eyes looking at him anxiously. He knew that she was worried about him. His heart warmed and his voice became gentle. "I'm fine." Yan Ziyuan had been supporting Yi Feng. She was afraid that if she let go, Yi Feng would fall. Hearing him say that he was fine, her beautiful eyebrows slightly knit together. "Yi Feng, you should rest a bit more. Don't force yourself. Don't force yourself." Yi Yu had said this to him many times. Today, he had finally heard it from her mouth again. Yi Feng stared at her for a while. His eyes seemed to be filled with emotions. His voice was slightly hoarse, as if he was trying to suppress something. "All right, I won't force myself." Yan Ziyuan didn't know why her heart was in a trance. A voice seemed to pass through thousands of mountains and rivers, carrying a bit of love. "I promise you, I won't force myself." Her heart suddenly throbbed with pain. This feeling was both sweet and sad, making her feel at a loss. Yi Feng sat cross-legged and entered a meditative state to recuperate. Yan Ziyuan stayed by his side, quietly lost in thought. Her mind was in a mess before, but for some reason, when she saw Yi Feng's calm face, her chaotic thoughts gradually calmed down. Yi Feng had this kind of invisible power that made people feel at ease, calm, and as steady as a mountain. After about the time it took for an incense stick to burn, Yi Feng slowly exhaled and stopped. When he stood up again, his complexion was much better. Yan Ziyuan also stood up and carefully looked at his complexion. After confirming that he was fine, she let out a long sigh of relief, feeling as if a large stone had been lifted from her heart. Only then did she remember Gu Ziyan. "Yi Feng, have you seen Ziyan?" Yi Feng's eyes darkened. "He's up there. He's safe." Gu Ziyan was up there. In other words, Yi Feng jumped down by himself to save her. Her heart was moved again. Yifeng quietly observed his surroundings. After a while, he said quietly, "We can't go out from the exit above. There's a cave here, let's explore." He didn't feel at ease leaving Yan Ziyuan alone, so he could only bring her along. Yan Ziyuan began to pay attention to her surroundings. She exclaimed, "What a beautiful place." This place was very strange. No one would have thought that there would be such a beautiful scene under the cave. Everywhere was crystal clear red. They were surrounded by red crystals, red icicles, red ice blades, and red towers. They were like the purest red crystals, shining with a soul-stealing light. The temperature here was just right, a few dozen degrees higher than the temperature above the cave. Yan Ziyuan even felt a little hot. Chapter 1062. The place they were in just happened to be a smooth and spacious area, and not far away, there was a row of blood-red mountain peaks. Yan Ziyuan only felt a chill run down her spine. If they had slid a few more meters, they would have directly crashed into the sharp mountain peaks. The consequences would have been unimaginable. And above them, there was a pitch-black cave entrance. They had fallen from there, and both of them knew how steep it was. So they also knew that they would definitely not be able to climb up. And right in front of them, there was another cave entrance. What was different from the previous cave entrance was that this one was very bright, so bright that it was somewhat dazzling. Inside the cave, there was a sparkling red passageway with countless twists and turns, making it impossible to see the end. All of this was a masterpiece of nature, and one couldn't help but gasp in amazement. Yifeng walked in front, and Yan Ziyuan followed behind. The two of them walked very carefully. Yifeng would sometimes knock on the cave wall, and casually throw a crystal in front of them. After confirming that there were no problems, he protected Yan Ziyuan as they walked forward. If they weren't trapped here at this time, Yan Ziyuan would definitely appreciate the uncanny workmanship of nature. Who would have thought that there would be such a warm and beautiful place a few thousand meters under the frozen snowfield? More importantly, there was actually plenty of oxygen here, so Yan Ziyuan didn't feel stuffy at all. Yan Ziyuan was still quite vigilant at first, obediently following behind Yifeng, and only used her curious eyes to look around at the red crystals. But after walking for a long distance and still nothing happened, she finally couldn't suppress the desire in her heart, and after obtaining Yifeng's permission, she touched the crystal cave wall. It was cold and smooth to the touch, and it was very comfortable. Yan Ziyuan began to touch here and there, and Yifeng had always doted on Yan Ziyuan, so after confirming that there was no problem, he naturally let her do as she pleased. Of course, he wouldn't let Yan Ziyuan be too far away from him. The more beautiful a place was, the more likely it was to be dangerous. This was his experience after living for thousands of years. Even though he was walking in front of Yan Ziyuan and didn't look back from beginning to end, no matter how fast or slow Yan Ziyuan walked, he always kept a distance of 3 meters from her, not an inch more or less. This distance would make her feel safe and less resistant to him. And when she was really in danger, he would be able to protect her in time and not let her get hurt again. It's so warm here. It would be great if Xian could come in too. Yan Ziyuan thought of Gu Xian, who was still starving in the ice and snow. Yifeng's back stiffened slightly. He didn't say anything. When Gu Xian saw his beloved fall into the ice crevice, he didn't even have the intention to follow her down. That kind of person was definitely not Ziyuan's man. If she married Gu Xian, it would definitely be a disaster in the future. But how could he stop it when the time came? Yifeng had a lot on his mind, but he didn't show it on his face. He continued to walk forward without saying a word. This place was beautiful, but it seemed to be filled with a kind of death aura. Other than the sound of their footsteps and the occasional conversation, there was no other sound. It was as silent as a tomb. If Yan Ziyuan was walking here alone, she would have been scared out of her wits. But now that Yifeng was by her side, she actually felt strangely at ease. It was as if as long as he was by her side, even if the sky fell, she wouldn't be afraid, because Yifeng would hold it up for her. From time to time, crystalline crystals would appear in this cave. They were of different shapes and shined with different lusters. Chapter 1063. Yan Ziyuan inadvertently looked forward and saw a piece of red crystal. It was as big as a person's palm and vaguely had the shape of a mermaid. Her heart skipped a beat. She ran over and picked it up. Just as she held the crystal in her hand, she suddenly heard a gust of wind above her head. "Be careful." Before Yan Ziyuan could react, her body fell into someone's arms. That person spun quickly with her and waved his sleeve again. Paw! Boom! An object moved half a foot and crashed to the ground. 2 consecutive loud noises shook the cave, causing the ground beneath their feet to tremble. Yan Ziyuan opened her eyes in shock and found herself in Yifeng's arms. At the place where she was standing, there was a huge crystal. That crystal was slightly slanted. Obviously, it was due to Yifeng's palm. Yan Ziyuan's heart was beating fast. If Yifeng didn't move her away in time, she would have been slapped under the crystal and become a meat patty. "Thank you," she murmured in his arms and forgot to push him away for a moment. His steady heartbeat was right next to her ear, making her heart beat faster. "With me, you don't have to be polite." Yifeng let go of her and took a few steps back, still keeping a safe distance from her. Suddenly leaving his arms, Yan Ziyuan felt a little disappointed. She calmed down and looked at the big stone. Where did this stone fall from? Yifeng raised his head and looked at the ceiling. A hint of surprise flashed through his eyes. Although the cave wall above was crisscrossed with all kinds of crystals like fangs, there were no traces of it ever being broken. This big rock did not seem to have fallen from above. Then where did this big stone fall from? This big stone fell in a strange way. What was even stranger was that it just happened to block the passage they came from. Yifeng walked over to take a look. This big stone had already reached the top of the cave and had completely blocked their way. Unless he turned into his original body or a water snake, he would be able to swim out from the edge of this big stone. He raised his hand and pushed again, but the boulder didn't budge. It was as if it had grown on the ground in an instant. Yifeng frowned slightly. With his current strength, not to mention such a huge boulder, even if it was twice the size of this boulder, he would still be able to push it. But now, it was as if it was cast iron on the ground. It didn't shake at all. In other words, their path was sealed, and they could only move forward. "We can't go back, right?" Yan Ziyuan was nervous and couldn't help but ask. "Don't worry, we'll find another way out." Yifeng comforted her. Yan Ziyuan looked ahead at the endless winding passageway and couldn't help but grab Yifeng's sleeve. "I wonder if there's a way out in front." When she listened to those adventure stories, she felt that they were very exciting and hot-blooded. Chapter 1064. During this period of time, he just needed to protect Yan Ziyuan and not let anything happen to her. His voice had the power to calm people's hearts, and Yan Ziyuan's panicked heart finally calmed down. It was only at this moment that she realized she was still desperately pulling on Yifeng's sleeve. Her heart skipped a beat and she finally let go. As if she thought of something, she held the crystal in her hand and waved it in front of Yifeng. "Yifeng, what do you think this looks like?" Yifeng looked at her palm. He didn't have many romantic cells in his body, so he couldn't see what it was for a while. In his eyes, it was just a normal crystal. His attention was on her little hand. That little hand was red and swollen, and there were many frozen wounds on it. There were even some wounds that were still losing blood. It was clear how much she had suffered along the way. Yifeng's heart ached. Without saying a word, he took out the bottle of medicine that was left with only a little bit left. He pulled her hand over and applied the precious ointment on her wound. When Yen Ziyuan saw the ointment, her hand couldn't help shrinking back. Yifeng, don't apply this on me. This is life-saving medicine. This is just a small wound from frostbite. It's fine. Yifeng still applied the rest of the ointment on her. His fingers were slightly cold. When he held her hand and applied the ointment, Yen Ziyuan actually felt like there was an electric current on his hand. It went into her heart, and that kind of feeling was warm and sour. It made her eyes inexplicably warm. Yen Ziyuan's heart felt like someone had thrown a stone into the lake. It was very turbulent. She suddenly blurted out, "Were you really my older brother in your previous life?" Yifeng's fingers slightly paused, and then he let go of her hand. Right now he didn't know what she was thinking when she broke the twin curse, so he didn't want to explain too much to her. He only gave a faint "end" sound. How good would it be if he wasn't her older brother? Otherwise, she would have definitely fallen in love with him in her previous life. Yen Ziyuan's heart suddenly had this thought that scared her. How could he have such thoughts? Could it be that she had fallen for Yifeng? No, this is impossible. She loved Gu Ziyan and was about to marry Gu Ziyan. She couldn't let her imagination run wild. Otherwise, how would she be any different from the promiscuous women she usually despised? She calmly took a few steps back and smiled. Then you should be my brother from now on. I will treat you as my real brother. Yifeng, a hint of sadness flashed through his eyes. It turned out that no matter if it was in the previous life or this life, he could only be her brother. However, this was also good. Back then, he had gambled on his fate with Yi Yu. It was impossible for him and her to be together. This was also good. He turned around and said faintly, "Let's go. We'll find a way to get out." He took the lead and walked forward. Yen Ziyuan walked a few steps behind him and walked side by side with him. She handed over the crystal in her palm. "Yifeng Gij, this is for you." Yifeng was a bit confused as he took the crystal. Yen Ziyuan then said, "Don't you think that this crystal looks a bit like a mermaid? I'll give it to you as a souvenir." Yifeng looked down at the crystal in his hand. After Yen Ziyuan's explanation, he finally felt that this crystal really did look like a mermaid. He slightly held the crystal in his hand. This was the first time Yen Ziyuan had given him something. Although she had casually picked it up, it was still a gift from her, and it still had her body temperature. Chapter 1065. Yifeng carefully put away the crystal and faintly smiled. "Let's go." Yifeng actually smiled. He actually looked so good when he smiled. Yen Ziyuan's heart skipped a few beats, but she immediately shook her head. She threw all the distracting thoughts to the side and walked forward. Along the way, she picked up a slender and round crystal. She said with a smile, "This crystal is not bad. It looks like a human. When we get back, I'll use it to carve a person for Ziyan. He'll definitely like it." Yifeng's footsteps slightly paused. He did not reply, but the smile on his lips froze. "Brother Yifeng, do you think it's better to carve a standing figure or a sitting one on this stone? On this edge looks like a zither. Then carve him playing the zither. I have to carve it myself. Big brother Yifeng, will you help me?" It was as if she had suddenly been enlightened and found a way to get along with Yifeng. She kept calling him Big Brother Yifeng very naturally and intimately. Yifeng's face was slightly pale. He only replied with a single word, "I'll help." He would never refuse her requests. "Big Brother Yifeng, my hand has really healed. That medicine is really effective." Yen Ziyuan waved her small hand in front of him. That medicine was naturally very effective. In just a few moments, Yan Ziyuan's wounds began to scab over and the red swelling began to fade. Yi Feng's face finally revealed a small smile as he gave an unsound. The two of them walked forward for a while and a narrow cave entrance appeared in front of them. Waves of heat rushed over them. After walking into the cave, Yan Ziyuan suddenly cried out in joy, "So beautiful." The two of them suddenly opened up in front of them. There was a large and boundless cave with a fiery red river of lava flowing through it. On both sides of the lava river, there were layers of large crystal-like rocks. In the cracks of the large rocks, there were countless flowers blooming like stars. There were 7 or 8 different kinds of flowers that the two of them had never seen before. Swaying in the cave. Ice flame flower. Brother Yifeng, are there any ice flame flowers here? Yan Ziyuan's voice trembled. Yifeng's heart was also surging with emotions. His eyes fell on the fiery red rocks, where several large flowers were blooming side by side. We've finally found the flower of ice flame. The flowers were a faint blue color. They were as big as bowls and were translucent. They stood out from the rest of the flowers. Icy flame flower. This was the ice flame flower that they had been searching for with all their might. Yan Ziyuan's twin curse was about to be broken. Yifeng's fingers trembled slightly. He couldn't help but glance at Yan Ziyuan beside him. Her face was also full of joy. Xian's illness has finally been cured. We have to find a way to inform the people outside to let Xian in. Shuima said that the flowers have to be eaten immediately after being plucked. But the way in has already been blocked. Where is he going to come in? Yifeng's eyes dimmed. Her heart was only thinking about Gu Xian. If the twin curse was broken, she would still be like this. No matter if it was good or bad, there had to be a result. That's right, Brother Yifeng, do you have a way to contact the people outside? Yifeng slowly shook his head. We have been relying on Kirin to contact Miss Ning, then what should we do? Wait. Yifeng only said one word. He believed that Ning Shuima and the others would come. Yan Ziyuan sighed. It seems like that's the only way. Chapter 1066. She simply found a place a little further away from the lava river and sat down. She took out the slender crystal from her arms and a sharp dagger for self-defense. She smiled and said, "Since I have nothing to do, I'll carve a small statue of him to pass the time." Yifeng, his fingers touched the mermaid-like crystal that she had just given him. He made up his mind and handed the mermaid crystal to her. "Ziyuan, can you help me carve this first?" This crystal originally had the shape of a mermaid, and it would look more like one with a little carving. And this was perhaps the only thing she could give him. In the future, even if he couldn't be by her side, this thing would be a little comforting. Yan Ziyuan was thinking about how to carve the crystal in her hand. She didn't raise her head when she heard his words, "I'll carve yours later." Yifeng slowly withdrew his hand. Yan Ziyuan seemed to have noticed something. She looked up at him and added, "If there's still time after carving this, I'll carve yours." Yifeng didn't say anything and put the mermaid crystal back into his arms. He lowered his head and was about to tell her to be careful not to cut her hand when suddenly he seemed to have sensed something. His face changed, and his body swept away like smoke. He flew directly to Yan Ziyuan's side. Before she could react, he picked her up and quickly retreated. Yan Ziyuan was caught off guard. The crystal in her hand fell to the ground and broke into several pieces. Yan Ziyuan, she was held in Yifeng's arms and didn't react for a moment. When she reacted, she was already a few feet away in the passage. She was stunned for a moment and looked behind her. It was calm and peaceful there. Nothing had appeared. It was just as usual. There was no danger. Her eyes fell on the broken crystal. Her heart sank and anger surged up. She suddenly struggled in his arms. "Let go of me." However, Yifeng was still hugging her. His eyes were fixed on the lava river, as if he did not hear anything. Yan Ziyuan was furious. Was this person purposely breaking the one she wanted to carve for Gu Ziyan because she didn't carve it for him first? She had always been a spoiled brat. At this moment, she was so angry that she slapped Yifeng without thinking. "Bastard, let go of me." Yifeng couldn't dodge in time, or perhaps he didn't even think of dodging. The slap landed squarely on his cheek, crisp and clear. She had used quite a bit of strength in that slap. Yifeng's head tilted from the force of the slap, and blood trickled down from the corner of his lips. He was startled, and his arms loosened slightly. Yan Ziyuan finally broke free from his embrace and stood on the ground. Yan Ziyuan saw the blood trickling down the corner of his lips and stiffened for a moment. She didn't expect that he would be hit so hard. Her heart was beating wildly. She snorted, "Who told you to take advantage of me?" "Humph, I didn't expect you to be so petty. You actually broke that crystal of mine. Let me tell you, even if that's the case, I won't carve that for you. I won't ever." She was so angry that she wanted to say a few more harsh words. However, she inadvertently saw where she was originally standing. Her eyes widened. She was standing on a hard and uneven crystal slope. At this moment, there was a swamp in the crystal slope. All the large rocks in the surroundings seemed to be attracted and slid into the swamp. There wasn't even a sound as they were swallowed by the fiery red swamp. The large rock she was sitting on had long disappeared. It must have been swallowed by the swamp. Chapter 1067. So he was trying to save her, and not because he was jealous of Gu Ziyan. Her heart felt like it was being pricked by a needle. I'm sorry." She was about to say a few words of apology, but her eyes inadvertently looked inside, and her face suddenly changed. That fiery red swamp was still rapidly expanding. It seemed like it was going to merge with the lava river. The crystals and flowers on the shore were all swallowed by the swamp, and they could no longer be seen. Now, they were moving closer to the few ice flame flowers on the shore. Heavens, these flowers were hard to find. If they were swallowed, it would be as difficult as ascending to the heavens if they wanted to find other flowers. Heavens, ice flame flowers. Yan Ziyuan screamed. "Don't move, I'll go pick the flowers." Yifeng quickly instructed her. His body moved, and like a bolt of lightning, he flew towards the few ice flame flowers. "You! Be careful." Yan Ziyuan could not help but call out. Yifeng's figure slightly paused, and he looked back with a gentle smile. "I know, don't be afraid." Yan Ziyuan only saw Yifeng's figure flash, and he flew above the ice flame flowers. The moment he plucked the flowers, a huge fire dragon covered in dark magma patterns instantly jumped out. Yan Ziyuan instantly opened her eyes wide. What kind of monster was this? Dragon? No, this monster had a dragon's head, but its body was like a giant lizard. It looked as big as a house, and was abnormally fierce. Its pair of flaming eyes stared fiercely at Yifeng, and it raised its head and let out a low roar. The sound it emitted was very strange, and Yan Ziyuan only heard a series of beastly snoring sounds. On the other hand, Yifeng's face flushed red for a moment before turning slightly pale. This was the legendary magma fire dragon. Earth rank level 9. It was said that this beast could already summon the wind and rain, move mountains, and fill seas. As long as it broke through Earth rank level 9 and entered Heaven rank level 1, it could turn into a golden dragon and soar above the 9 heavens. This beast was almost as famous as the Cheong Chi, Swan Ni, and other ancient beasts. No one dared to provoke it. Once it pestered you, it would not rest until you were dead. Even if Yi Feng was at his peak, he might not be able to defeat it, not to mention that he had already used up more than half of his telekinesis. In this state, he was even less of a match for it. The magma dragon's roar just now was a special kind of sound wave. Humans could not hear it clearly, but as shark men, he could receive this kind of sound wave. The lethality of that sound wave was not small, shaking until the blood in his entire body churned. The sound waves emitted by the magma dragon were obviously a warning. It was asking him for the 3 ice flame flowers. Yi Feng took a step back and put the 3 ice flame flowers into his bosom. This flower was hard to come by, so he definitely couldn't give it to this dragon. Magma Dragon understood the meaning of Yi Feng's body movements and immediately became furious. With another long roar, it paused and rushed towards Yi Feng with countless flames and hot winds. If Yi Feng escaped by himself, with his speed, he might be able to escape from the Magma Dragon's pursuit. However, his and Yan Ziyuan's escape route had been blocked by the large rock that appeared out of nowhere, so he could only escape to the dark passage on the other side of the Magma River. But now that he had Yan Ziyuan by his side, he couldn't bring her across the Magma River. And once he escaped into the passage where Yan Ziyuan was, the Magma Dragon would definitely chase after him. Then, Yan Ziyuan would be in great danger. So he could only fight with all his might, and in the blink of an eye, he fought with the Magma Dragon until the sky turned dark. Chapter 1068. One man and one dragon, one water and one fire. Their attributes just so happened to counter each other. Although the Magma Dragon was powerful, its attributes were restrained by Yi Feng's attributes. Therefore, it was unable to tear apart this merman who dared to challenge its majesty, but Yi Feng was an Earth rank level 7 after all, and there was a great disparity between his strength and the Magma Dragon's. Every time the Magma Dragon spat out a huge tongue of fire at him, although he desperately used a water column to extinguish it, he was still shaken to the point that the blood in his chest kept churning, and he almost vomited. He gritted his teeth and fought. He had no way out now, he could only fight. He couldn't let the Magma Dragon hurt Yan Ziyuan, so when he retreated in the other direction, deeper and deeper into the Magma River, and the Magma River was still being swallowed by the swamp. Fiery red magma emerged from the swamp, swallowing and spitting out flames. Yi Feng's figure flew as if he was flying, and spun around the crystals that were about to fall. Several times, he almost stepped on empty air and was swallowed by the fiery red swamp. Yan Ziyuan was scared out of her wits. She saw Yi Feng getting closer and closer to the Magma River, so nervous that her heart almost jumped out. Yi Feng, come here. Don't retreat anymore. She saw Yi Feng almost stepping on the churning magma and was scared out of her wits. Finally, she couldn't help but scream. Now, in this whole place, only the tunnel Yan Ziyuan was in was relatively safe. Her scream didn't call Yi Feng, but it made the Magma Dragon look in her direction, and then, a big fireball flew towards her face. Ziyuan, be careful. Yi Feng yelled as he flew over without a care for anything else. He actually arrived before the fireball and blocked in front of Yan Ziyuan. Originally, when he fought with the dragon, he used guerrilla tactics and didn't confront the dragon directly. Firstly, he wanted to avoid its edge, and secondly, he wanted to feel out the dragon's style. But at this moment, in order to protect Yan Ziyuan behind him, he could no longer dodge and could only face the attack head-on. He waved his hand and set up 2 water walls in front of him to block the fireball. Boom! 2 deafening explosions rang out. The fireball hit the water wall, making an earth-shattering sound. In any case, the fireball was extinguished, and the 2 water walls that Yi Feng set up were also broken. Yi Feng was also shaken to the point that his face turned pale. A mouthful of blood surged up his throat, but he forcefully swallowed it back down. Ziyuan, step back, he shouted. Yan Ziyuan also knew that she couldn't help at this time. She gritted her teeth and took a few steps back, but her eyes were fixed on Yifeng. She couldn't help but say, "You, be careful." Understood. Yifeng's reply was very light, but his heart was slightly warm. Wu la la la, wu ka ka ka. The magma dragon suddenly made a series of long and short sounds. Yan Ziyuan didn't understand the beast language, and only felt that the sound was a little harsh, but she didn't feel anything else. But Yifeng's face changed. He understood the beast language, and he already heard the ruthless words that the magma dragon said, "Don't even think about running away. This divine beast will completely turn your bones into ashes and scatter your souls, so that you won't be able to reincarnate." Yifeng knew that the magma dragon in front of him had this ability. If he was defeated, the two of them would fall into the hands of the magma dragon, and their souls would be scattered. It didn't matter if Yifeng died, Sharkman didn't have a chance to reincarnate, but Yan Ziyuan did. He definitely couldn't let Yan Ziyuan fall into that state. So he could only win, and not fail. Chapter 1069. He took a deep breath, and pearl-like blood beads suddenly appeared on his 10 fingers. They moved rapidly in the air as he chanted. In the blink of an eye, a blood talisman was formed in the air. The blood talisman was beautiful, but it had an ominous aura. The blood talisman spun in the air and went directly into Yifeng's body. Yifeng's face turned pale and then red. At this moment, it was as if he was injected with chicken blood. His power doubled in an instant. His pair of blue eyes were now glowing red. He once again engaged in a fierce battle with the lava dragon. Although Yan Ziyuan's kung fu was not high, she could still see the general pattern. She was surprised to find that Yifeng, who had already fallen into a disadvantageous position, seemed to have been injected with great vitality in an instant. His whole body was in high spirits, and the water column and ice blades he shot out were getting bigger and sharper, forcing the magma dragon to retreat step by step. The magma dragon was naturally unwilling to give up and fought back with all its might. A man and a dragon fought together, dazzling the onlookers. They were fighting so fiercely that the whole cave was shaking and rumbling. Countless crystals fell down and melted in the magma. The magma surged and overflowed, like a tongue of fire wantonly engulfing the entire cave. Yan Ziyuan could not help but take a few steps back, but she was shaken to the point where she could not stand. The whole scene was like the end of the world. The beautiful crystal cave had now become a purgatory on earth. It was a sea of fire, and the temperature in the air was rising sharply. In the blink of an eye, it had risen to an unbearable level. Yan Ziyuan could no longer calm down and watch the fight. She began to dodge the falling crystals. The high temperature made her vision hazy. The water in her body seemed to have evaporated, and she became weak. She tried her best to retreat, but the oxygen in the air seemed to be getting less and less. Her limbs were weak and her mind was in a daze. Finally, she collapsed to the ground. Her head was buzzing, and her vision turned black. The darkness was spreading rapidly. A huge crystal above her head began to shake because of the fight. It was on the verge of falling down. Before she fainted, she saw the lava dragon collapse and Yifeng arrive, bathed in blood. Yan Ziyuan slowly regained consciousness. She slowly opened her eyes. There was absolute darkness in front of him. He couldn't even see his own fingers. No matter how hard she blinked, it was useless. Could it be that she was blind? A huge wave of panic swept over her. She clawed around with both hands, trying to grab something to calm the panic in her heart. His entire body was burning, and the pain was intense. He must have been accidentally scratched by the falling crystal. His calf seemed to be fractured. Every time he moved, he felt a piercing pain. She tried to move, but found that her body seemed to be stuck somewhere, and she couldn't move at all. He was buried alive. What about Yifeng? What about Yifeng? She was so flustered that she couldn't help but call out, Yifeng. The moment she spoke, she felt that her voice was extremely hoarse and her throat was burning with pain. No one responded. Yifeng, where are you? Only her own voice was still echoing in the air. Yifeng, you're here, right? Don't scare me. Her voice even sounded like she was about to cry. The surroundings were dead silent. It was so quiet that she could hear her own heartbeat. It was as if she was alone in a huge empty tomb. Chapter 1070. Her surroundings were deathly silent. It was so quiet that she could hear her own heartbeat. It was as if she was alone in a huge and empty tomb. No matter how much she cried and screamed, no one answered. Could it be that Yifeng was dead? Yan Ziyuan could only move her hands in a small area. She frantically groped around. She was surrounded by large stones. Some were sharp, some were round, and some were squeezed around her. She was stuck in the gap between the stones and could not move at all. At this time, she finally understood that she was really buried underground. The shadow of death hung above her head. Yifeng. 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 Where are you? The great fear made Yan Ziyuan's voice choke with sobs. It was somewhat shrill and mournful. Could it be that she was buried here by herself? Was Yifeng already dead? No, her hands frantically groped around. Yifeng, Yifeng, answer me. Don't ignore me. I'm scared. I'm telling you, I'm scared. Suddenly, there was the sound of stones crashing around her. A hand gently held her frantic and trembling hand. She was startled. Then, like a drowning person, she tried to hold on to a piece of driftwood. Yifeng. Is it you? That hand held her again. Although the strength was light, it was firm. A hoarse voice came, but it was calm as usual. Don't be scared. It's me. It was Yifeng. He was still alive. Yan Ziyuan's heart, which had been hanging in the air for a long time, finally calmed down a little. Tears flowed out of her eyes. She held his hand tightly, as if she had finally found someone to rely on. She felt wronged and frightened at the same time. Are we buried alive? You, how are you? Yifeng's wet palm gently patted her small hand. I'm fine. His hand was cold and wet. Yan Ziyuan became nervous again. She wanted to touch his hand. Why is your hand so wet? Is it blood? Is it blood? Are you injured? Is it serious? Is it serious? She and Yifeng were separated by a few rocks. Yifeng's hand was forcibly squeezed through the cracks. She couldn't see Yifeng's expression clearly and couldn't check his injuries. Her heart was in her throat again. Yifeng slowly withdrew his hand and said indifferently, No, this is magma dragon's blood. Yifeng's voice was still calm, and his breathing was also very stable. It didn't seem like he was injured. Yan Ziyuan finally breathed a sigh of relief. She placed her hand back into Yifeng's. Yifeng. Can you hold my hand? I'm scared. Her voice was weak and tentative. It sounded like she would break down if Yifeng rejected her. However, deep in her heart, she firmly believed that Yifeng would not reject her. Yifeng had never rejected any of her requests. Even if it was an unreasonable request, Yifeng would do it for her without saying a word. Yifeng gently held her hand, making Yan Ziyuan feel a lot more at ease. However, her body was still trembling slightly. Chapter 1071. This sentence seemed to have a magical power. Every time Yi Feng said it, Yan Ziyuan would feel inexplicably at ease. Every time she was in danger and scared, it was Yi Feng who saved her time and time again, comforting her time and time again. Yi Feng. Why are you always so good to me? But I already have Xian. I will end up with Xian in the end. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? How am I going to repay your love? Yi Feng, I wish I could split myself in two. Yan Ziyuan's tears flowed out of her eyes like pearls from a broken necklace. They fell one by one, wetting her cheeks and falling onto the rocks beside her, slowly disappearing. One of the tears seemed to fall onto Yi Feng's hand. He immediately pulled it back as if he had been scalded. Yan Ziyuan was shocked. She fumbled around and grabbed his hand. Her voice sounded like she had been greatly wronged. Yi Feng. Yi Feng's hand fumbled around to wipe away Yan Ziyuan's tears. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't wipe them all away. He sighed and said in a slightly hoarse voice, Ziyuan. Don't cry. I'm fine. I won't let anything happen to you. He suddenly coughed. Although he tried his best to suppress it, he couldn't stop for a while. Yan Ziyuan opened her eyes wide. She wanted to see Yi Feng's condition clearly, but it was still pitch black. Yi Feng, what's wrong with you? You are seriously injured, aren't you? Does it hurt? Why can't you stop coughing? Her tears seemed like they were about to gush out again. Yi Feng had already stopped coughing. His voice sounded weak, but this weakness disappeared in an instant. He said lightly, I'm fine. It's just a flesh wound. I accidentally breathed in the dust that floated down just now, so I coughed a few times. Dust? Maybe so. Yan Ziyuan's chaotic mind calmed down a little. She held Yi Feng's hand tightly, as if she wanted to draw courage from it. She held his hand, not daring to let go. She could feel that Yi Feng was really by her side. In this dark underground, she was not alone. Yi Feng was with her. She felt that her chest was a little stuffy, and the huge rock that was pressing down on her made it hard for her to breathe. She really wanted to push the big rock away, but she didn't have the strength. Yi Feng, will we die here? No, Ziyuan, you have to hold on. You can do it. Yi Feng's voice sounded a little rushed. But, this is several thousand feet underground. You are also trapped, we are buried here. How can we get out? Yan Ziyuan's voice was filled with helplessness. Master Han and Miss Ning will come. Ziyuan, don't be discouraged, this space was very small, and it was sealed by rocks. After a while, the oxygen began to run out. Yan Ziyuan gradually felt cold. The stuffy feeling in her chest became more and more intense. Her head also felt a little dizzy, as if she would fall asleep in the next second. She muttered softly, Yi Feng. I'm so sleepy. Yi Feng suddenly tightened his grip on her hand. Ziyuan, you can't sleep. Yan Ziyuan woke up for a moment. I don't want to sleep either, but I'm really sleepy. Can I sleep for a while? Yi Feng patted her hand. His usually calm voice finally had a trace of panic. He finally became talkative. Ziyuan, you can't sleep. If you sleep, you won't be able to wake up. Think about your family. They are waiting for you at home. Your husband is still outside the cave. Chapter 1072. Yi Feng seemed to be in pain when he said the last sentence, but it was replaced by anxiety in an instant. Ziyuan. Wake up. Yes, Xian was still waiting for her. Yan Ziyuan forced herself to be awake and repeated over and over again, Father is still waiting for me. Xian is still waiting for me. I can't sleep, I can't sleep. Her voice gradually became softer. She suddenly felt a sharp pain in her finger, which made her sober for a moment. She seemed to have suddenly remembered something, that magma dragon. Dead. Yi Feng answered succinctly. Yen Ziyuan breathed a sigh of relief, then what about the ice flame flower? It's with me. Yen Ziyuan breathed a sigh of relief again, but she was still worried about another thing. If we pluck it in advance, will it lose its effect? Ning Xuemo once said that after plucking the flower, it must be consumed within 2 hours for it to be effective. No. I have a way to keep it fresh. Yi Feng was silent for a moment and answered. Yen Ziyuan seemed to have sensed something. Guilt welled up in her heart, and she didn't say anything. Her dizziness became worse, and her eyes wanted to close again. Ziyuan, you can't sleep. Yi Feng held her hand tightly again. Yen Ziyuan forced herself to be awake. Yes, I won't sleep. I won't sleep. Her voice gradually became softer, suddenly became louder, and then gradually became softer again. Again and again, it could be seen that Yen Ziyuan was fighting against sleepiness. However, her voice became softer and softer, and finally, it was close to a murmur. The lack of oxygen for a long time made her a little confused. The reason why she was still holding on was that there was a trace of faith in her heart supporting her. Yi Feng kept shaking her hand. Ziyuan, wake up. Hold on a little longer. Xuema and the others will arrive soon and save you. Yen Ziyuan's consciousness was almost blurred. She only heard half of Yi Feng's words. Suddenly, she trembled and became clear-headed for a moment. We have to go out together. Yi Feng paused for a moment, then softly replied, okay. Yen Ziyuan seemed to have become delirious. She just subconsciously repeated, go out together. Go out together. Yi Feng, we have to go out together. Yi Feng grabbed her hand and suddenly exerted force. Pain swept through her body in a flash. Yen Ziyuan suddenly woke up. Yi Feng, what are you doing? Ziyuan, let me sing a song for you. Don't sleep anymore, okay? Yi Feng wanted to sing. She had never heard shark men sing before. It must be beautiful, right? Yen Ziyuan shook her head and tried to wake herself up. Okay, I won't sleep. Woo-woo, the sea breeze blows, Walala, the waves roll, I pull the sea breeze to play on the swing. Yi Feng's voice had the tranquility and beauty of the deep sea. It seemed to resonate with the surrounding stone walls. His voice echoed in this small space, with a sense of emptiness and loneliness. Yen Ziyuan only felt her heart ache. Countless images flashed through her mind. The background was dark blue. She seemed to see an indescribably beautiful mermaid singing in the deep sea, which strangely overlapped with Yi Feng's voice and echoed. Just as she was about to touch it, these images scattered like shooting stars, and she could no longer find any trace of it. Yen Ziyuan couldn't help but hum along, woo-woo, the sea breeze blows, walala, the waves roll, I pull the sea breeze to play on the swing. After an unknown period of time, there was suddenly a small sound above her head. Chapter 1073. After an unknown amount of time, there was a sudden strange sound from above. Yen Ziyuan was already in a semi-conscious state. Her hand was held again, but this time, the strength was much lighter. Ziyuan, wake up. Xuema and the others are here. Xuema and the others are here. Yen Ziyuan shook her head and opened her eyes, but they were still pitch black. There was nothing out of the ordinary. She said in a daze, Yi Feng, you must be hallucinating. Suddenly, there was another muffled sound from above. It sounded like someone was moving rocks. This time, Yen Ziyuan heard it too. She forced herself to stay awake and shook Yifeng's hand excitedly. Yifeng, they're here. They're here to save us. Then, she shouted, Xuemo. We're here. She tried her best, but her voice was still as soft as a mosquito's. The muffled sound from above suddenly stopped. Yan Ziyuan seemed to hear a clear voice. Oh my God, Guru, they're really buried underground. Quickly move these rocks away. Let's save them quickly. There seemed to be fewer and fewer rocks above, and there was more and more oxygen. Because of the large amount of oxygen entering her lungs, she felt a slight swelling pain. Her dizzy mind gradually cleared up. Finally, a ray of light shone in, dispelling the lonely darkness. Then, the light became brighter and brighter. Yan Ziyuan closed her eyes in discomfort. When she opened them again, she saw Ning Xuemo's bright eyes. Ziyuan, are you okay? Yan Ziyuan looked at Ning Xuemo's delicate face and suddenly felt like a lifetime had passed. Was she saved? She didn't know how long she had been buried underground. It had been so long that she thought she was going to die, but she was suddenly saved. She felt like she was in a trance. The next second, she was ecstatic at being saved. At this moment, she almost wanted to cry. She suddenly turned her head. Her delicate face was full of surprise. Yifeng, we. Yan Ziyuan's voice stopped abruptly. She finally saw Yifeng's hand clearly. She could only see one of his arms. That arm was badly mangled and stuck between the cracks of the stone. Only one hand was still intact, but it was also pale and motionless. Yan Ziyuan screamed and then desperately tried to dig at the rocks around the arm. Yifeng. Yifeng, answer me. There was no reply. Yifeng, we're saved. Can you answer me? Yan Ziyuan's heart almost jumped out of her chest. She screamed as she tried to dig out the stones. I'll get you out. The lower half of her body was still stuck in the crack of the stone. This sudden turn of the body caused her unbearable pain, but she was completely unaware of it. Only a huge panic filled her heart. It can't be, Yifeng must have fainted. They were saved. When Ning Xuemo saw the color of Yifeng's fingers, her heart sank to the bottom. She quickly moved away a few more crystals. Then she jumped down and landed beside Yan Ziyuan. She then felt the pulse of that hand. There was no pulse. Yifeng, Ning Xuemo's face was pale. She quickly dug out the stones that had almost buried Yifeng. The wounds on Yan Ziyuan's hand split open and soon dyed the rocks red. She seemed to not feel it. Her body trembled violently and her face was pale. Yifeng. Yifeng. Answer me. No one answered. Yan Ziyuan's voice was trembling. Yifeng, don't scare me. Chapter 1074. Shenjiuli suddenly appeared beside Ning Xuemo and pulled her up. With a wave of his hand, a gust of wind blew past. The rocks in front of Yan Ziyuan suddenly trembled and cracks spread all over the rocks. With a gentle blow of the wind, the rocks silently shattered into thousands of pieces and fell down like rain. Yifeng's figure was finally fully revealed in the fragmented stone foam curtain. He lay quietly in a large pool of blood. His clothes were tattered and his body was covered with hideous wounds. There was not a single piece of undamaged skin. His blood seemed to have long dried up, leaving behind streaks of dried blood. His eyes were tightly shut and his face was as pale as snow. He did not move at all. Yan Ziyuan was petrified. After a while, she slowly walked over step by step and pushed Yifeng's body. Her voice trembled as she said, "Wake up, we are saved." Yifeng still did not move. Yan Ziyuan was naturally unwilling to give up and pushed him again. Yifeng, don't scare me. Wake up, wake up. No matter how she pushed, Yifeng did not move. He lay there quietly with his eyes closed and his long eyelashes drooping. It was as if he had fallen asleep. Yan Ziyuan's hands and feet were inexplicably trembling. They were extremely cold. Her heart felt as if it was suspended above an ice abyss and would fall at any moment. She suddenly turned her pleading gaze to Ning Xuemo. Xuemo, he fainted, right? He was just talking to me and singing for me. He must be too tired and has fainted, right? Can you wake him up? Once he wakes up, we can go out. Ning Xuemo's face became even paler. She did not give up and checked Yifeng's pulse, then his neck. She lifted his eyelids and looked at his pupils. Her fingers were also trembling. Yifeng did not have a heartbeat, no pulse, and his pupils were dilated. All the signs pointed to one thing. Yifeng was already dead. She was still too late. She had rushed here with all her might, but it was still too late. She suddenly turned around and grabbed Shinjuli's hand tightly. Guru, you have a way, right? Her gaze was like fire, carrying a final glimmer of hope. Shinjuli's heart sank. He held her waist tightly and shook his head slightly. If it was an ordinary person, even if they died, he could go to the underworld to capture their soul and revive them. However, Yifeng was shark men, and shark men only lived for one lifetime. Their souls did not return to hell. Once shark men died, their souls would automatically disperse and transform into the sea breeze. Even the Almighty couldn't do anything about it. She could only watch helplessly as another friend of hers left her. Although she had experienced many life and death situations, at this moment, her heart was in great pain. Yifeng had actually died just like that. He was afraid that he would die with regret in his heart. He didn't even see what Yan Ziyuan looked like when she broke the twin curse. How could this be? Gu Ziyan, the main culprit, was still alive and kicking, while Yifeng, such a good Yifeng, had died an unnatural death here. Ning Xuemo felt a fiery rage burning in her heart. She clenched her fists tightly and didn't say a word. Yan Ziyuan looked from one to the other. The more she looked, the more frightened and flustered she became. Xuemo, he can't wake up now. You're a divine doctor. You must have a way, right? Divine doctors can't save the dead. Ning Xuemo blurted out with an inexplicable anger. Yifeng is already dead. Chapter 1075. Yan Ziyuan suddenly opened her eyes wide and her body swayed. She shook her head desperately and said in a shrill voice, I don't believe it, I don't believe it. He can't be dead. He must have just fainted. He was just talking to me, telling me not to be afraid and saying that he wanted to go out with me. She reached out her hand and covered some of the wounds on Yifeng's body that were still bleeding. Her other hand searched Yifeng's body for something. Ointment. So many wounds, Yifeng must be in a lot of pain. I need to apply ointment quickly. Ning Xuemo. She didn't know what to say for a moment. Yan Ziyuan found a small red bottle on Yifeng's body. Her eyes lit up and she hurriedly opened it, only to find that the medicine in the small bottle had already been used up. Her tears finally fell. Xuemo, what should we do? We've used up all the medicine. What should we do? What should we do? She was like a lost child who had been abandoned. Her whole body was trembling and tears stained her eyelashes. She suddenly grabbed Ning Xuemo's hand again. Xuemo, you must have more medicine, right? Can you give me another bottle? His wounds are still bleeding. He must have fainted after losing so much blood. It'll be fine if we stop the bleeding. Your medicine is very good at stopping bleeding. Give me another bottle, give me another bottle. She anxiously pulled Ning Xuemo's hand and knelt down. I want to apply medicine for him. Seeing Yan Ziyuan like this, Ning Xuema's fingers clenched tightly. Although she tried to sound calm, there was a slight tremor in her voice. Ziyuan, it's useless. Yi Feng is already dead. No matter how good the medicine was, it wouldn't have the effect of bringing the dead back to life. Yan Ziyuan stared blankly at Ning Xuema, as if she didn't understand her words or refused to understand. She was stunned for a moment and shook her head violently. No. Of course not. How could Yi Feng die? He's so powerful that even Magma Dragon was defeated by him. Shinjuli suddenly said, Magma Dragon is at Earth rank level 9, and Yi Feng is only at level 7. He used the weapon dismemberment technique. His cold voice resounded in the narrow space, but it was exceptionally clear. It also awakens Yan Ziyuan's somewhat confused mind like the morning bell and evening drum. Dismemberment by force. Yan Ziyuan raised her head with tears in her eyes and asked subconsciously, What do you mean? Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. Her gaze fell on Yi Feng. Yi Feng's blood had almost dried up, and his fingers were stiff. Sure enough, it was the symptom of dismemberment. She was a smart person. Previously, when she and the Almighty entered the collapsed cave, they found the corpse of a magma dragon. Naturally, she knew how powerful this magma dragon was. She thought that Yi Feng and Yan Ziyuan were killed by this magma dragon. She almost cut open the magma dragon's stomach. Later, when she calmed down and checked the magma dragon's injuries, she saw that its body was full of wounds. It was obviously killed by someone. At that time, Ning Xuema was still wondering how Yi Feng's kung fu had improved so much. So that was why. It turned out that he used the weapon dismemberment technique. Yi Feng wanted to see Yan Ziyuan break the twin life curse. He had been enduring all kinds of injustice just to see Yan Ziyuan return to normal. These few days, he must have been dreaming of finding the ice flame flower and seeing her eat it. If it wasn't a critical moment, he wouldn't have chosen this path. How desperate was he when he used the weapon dismemberment technique? How helpless was he? Ning Xuema's heart was blocked by a hard knot. Chapter 1076. Ning Xuema's gaze fell on Yan Ziyuan. She couldn't help but share some knowledge with her. Execution can double a person's psychokinesis for the time it takes to burn a stick of incense. But once the time limit is over, the person will completely disappear from this world. That is to say, Yi Feng's soul has already dissipated half an hour ago. After saying the last sentence, she finally couldn't continue. Yan Ziyuan was stunned. The scene of Yi Feng fighting with Magma Dragon flashed through her mind. Her body trembled slightly. Yi Feng. Yi Feng. How could it be? How could it be? No, it can't be. It can't be like this, she suddenly screamed, no. No. You must have seen wrongly. How could his soul dissipate? He was clearly talking to me and even singing for me. Just now when you guys came, he even reminded me that I was saved. How could it be half an hour ago? You must be lying to me. I don't believe it. Ning Xuema. Her heart became even heavier and more stifled. Yi Feng should have died the moment Magma Dragon died. But his soul had been holding on. He kept talking to Yan Ziyuan until the rescue team arrived. Finally, he couldn't hold on anymore. Just how strong was his obsession? Ziyuan, how lucky you are to have Yi Feng's love. How unlucky you are to have mistaken a fisheye for a pearl. For Gu Zian, you hurt Yi Feng who loved you for 2 lifetimes, although there wasn't much logic in love, and although Ning Xuema knew that Yan Ziyuan was affected by the twin life curse, she still felt bad for Yi Feng. Ning Xuema couldn't help but sneer, because he was worried about you. He was afraid that you would be lonely and afraid that you would be scared. Yan Ziyuan's face turned pale. She felt like there was a row of steel needles piercing her heart. Her heart tightened into a ball and seemed to be convulsing in pain. For the first time in her life, her heart hurt so much. When she heard that Gu Ziyan's life was in danger at the wedding, she didn't feel so much pain. Yan Ziyuan sat there paralyzed. Her pretty face was full of pain and confusion. How could it be? Her gaze fell on Yifeng. The 3 flowers of ice flames were blooming beautifully in the pool of Sharkman's blood. They were nourished by the blood. Not only did they not wither, but they also became more crystal clear. Finally, Yan's eyes to the world. And she looked at it. Her hand was trembling, she almost couldn't hold it, and her fingertips, she was pale. Her heart hurt. Her heart was so painful. It was so painful it was like it was being cut inch by inch. If Yifeng's to look. Was Xiao. If Xiao. Yifeng's to snatch the flowers when the swamp appeared, he wouldn't have died. The flowers were the main culprit. She wanted to destroy them. She wanted to crush the flowers of ice flames with her fingers. Ning Xuema was quick. She tapped on Yan Ziyuan's wrist. Yan Ziyuan's wrist went numb. Chapter 1077. Yan Ziyuan staggered to her feet and tidied up her messy hair. I should be happy. She staggered again and squatted down. But why does my heart hurt so much? I didn't feel this much pain when Ziyan was dying. Why? Ziyan. Yes, he was the real culprit. There seemed to be a fire burning in Ning Xuema's heart. With a banged sound, it sprang up. She used the sensing technique to contact Kiran. Kiran's anxious voice immediately came through. Master, how is it? Is Yan Ziyuan still alive? Ning Xuema said coldly, Little Apple, kick that scumbag down. Kiran had long disliked that scumbag, so she agreed very quickly. Yes, master. Gu Ziyan was waiting anxiously on top. Suddenly, he saw Kiran striding over with an unfriendly aura. He immediately took a step back. What's wrong? You contacted. Before he could finish his words, the little Qilin had already kicked him down the ice crack. Go down and take a look yourself. Gu Ziyan screamed as he rolled down the cliff. After he landed, his face was pale. He was so scared and in pain that he couldn't stand up. When he came back to his senses, he saw Ning Xuema standing beside him with a cold face. She was holding 3 beautiful flowers in her hand. You found the flower of ice flame. He was about to reach out to take it when he suddenly felt his arm go numb. Then, he froze there, unable to move. He opened his eyes wide in fear. He wanted to shout for help, but he found that he couldn't make a sound. Ning Xuema ignored him. She waved her hand and formed a wooden blade. She directly cut Gu Ziyan's arm. Blood instantly gushed out and dripped onto the flower of ice flame. Ning Xuema patiently waited for each petal to drink the blood before she turned and left. Speaking of which, it was strange. The petals were clearly stained with blood, but after a short while, the blood had seeped through and disappeared. The petals still looked fresh and clean. Ning Xuema handed the flower of ice flame to Yan Ziyuan and said calmly, Ziyuan, eat this flower. Yan Ziyuan was stunned. She muttered, Why are you giving it to me? Isn't Ziyan sick? Ning Xuema looked at her. The one who's sick is not him, it's you. Gu Ziyan put the twin curse on you. Only this flower can cure it. Yan Ziyuan looked even more confused. Twin curse. That's right. You'll understand everything after you eat this flower of yours. When the time comes, what you choose to do will be up to you. Ning Xuemo said. Yifeng once wanted a result. He couldn't see it now, but the flower that he risked his life to get should still work. It could be considered as a comfort to Yifeng. Yan Ziyuan took a step back. Her gaze fell on the flower, and then she slowly turned to look at Gu Ziyan. Gu Ziyan's face changed when he heard Ning Xuemo's words. He was as pale as death. He was fooled. It turned out that they came to understand Yan Ziyuan's twin curse. He wanted to tell Yan Ziyuan not to eat it, but Ning Xuemo sealed his acupoints. He couldn't say a word. He could only watch as Yan Ziyuan slowly reached out and took the 3 flowers. Then she slowly lowered her head and ate the flower of ice flame. It's over. Gu Ziyan couldn't stand anymore. He sat on the ground with a plop. Ning Xuemo felt a moment of regret when she handed the flower to Yan Ziyuan. Once Yan Ziyuan broke the twin curse, recovered her memories, and saw Yifeng die for her, what would she do? Chapter 1078. When Ning Xuemo handed the flower to Yan Ziyuan, she had a moment of regret. Once Yan Ziyuan broke the twin life curse and recovered her memories, what would she do if she saw that Yifeng had died for her? But she immediately made up her mind and handed the flower to Yan Ziyuan. She definitely couldn't let Yifeng die in vain. She couldn't let Yan Ziyuan marry that scumbag. Seeing Yan Ziyuan slowly swallow the ice flame flower, she suddenly felt a sense of nervousness. Time passed second by second, but Yan Ziyuan was still sitting there calmly. Her face was getting paler and paler, and even her lips were drained of blood. She looked down at Yifeng, who was lying next to her, and her body began to tremble. Her hand trembled as she touched Yifeng's face. It was cold to the touch, as if her heart had sunk to the bottom of the sea. The coldness seemed to have scalded her fingertips, and she quickly moved away. Then she gently touched his eyebrows, his slightly closed eyes, and his high nose. Her voice trembled strangely, as if she was crying and laughing at the same time. You're really dead? You're really dead, dead. Her fingers trembled violently, but she stubbornly tried to feel his breath. Her face was getting paler and paler, and her eyes were getting bigger and bigger. She suddenly picked him up and hugged him tightly in her arms. She shook Yifeng's body vigorously and gripped his arm tightly. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. How can you die? Wake up for me. If you die, I'll immediately marry someone else. I'll be with someone else for the rest of my life. I'll never look at you again. I'll never look at you again, I'll never remember you again. Yifeng, do you hear me? Wake up. Wake up. I won't allow you to sleep again. I won't allow it, do you hear me? Of course, Yifeng didn't wake up and didn't move. No matter how much she threatened or cried, he would never wake up again. After he finished speaking, he abandoned Yifeng and walked towards Ning Xuemo. Xuemo, let's go. Let him continue pretending to be asleep. I don't want to talk to him anymore. Ning Xuemo was pulled a few steps forward by her. Just as she was about to say something, she saw Yan Ziyuan's eyes were empty, her face was pale, and her footsteps were getting slower and slower. Finally, Yan Ziyuan staggered and stopped. She slowly turned around and her gaze fell on Yifeng. Ning Xuemo's eyes fell on Yan Ziyuan's calf. Ziyuan, your leg is injured. Yan Ziyuan stared blankly at Ning Xuemo, then looked down at her calf. Her calf was mottled with blood, and she hadn't had time to bandage it. She suddenly staggered back and sat beside Yifeng. Yifeng. My leg is injured. It hurts. It really hurts. Get up and bandage it for me. She looked at him attentively, waiting for him to be like how he was in the past. Every time she was injured, he would be so heartbroken. He would count her carelessness and bandage her carefully. In the past, every time he was angry with her and ignored her, she would suffer a small injury and then run to his side to show him her grievance. He would sigh and bandage it for her. Now that her leg was injured to this extent, and the blood almost dyed her pants red, he wouldn't look at her or comfort her anymore. There was no one else in this world who cared about her as much as he did. He would never open his eyes to look at her again. Yan Ziyuan waited for a long time, but he didn't respond. She didn't give up and held his hand, pulling his hand to her leg. "Brother Yifeng, I'm really injured. Feel it." Chapter 1079. It was this pair of hands that had hugged her in the most dangerous time. One of his hands had covered her eyes, telling her not to be afraid. Now, his hands were passively placed on her thighs, and he would not bend his hands to protect her anymore. She was overwhelmed by a huge pain. She suddenly hugged him again, as if she had a blood feud with him. She hugged him so hard that her fingertips turned white. "I know, you must be taking revenge on me, right? You hate me for leaving with another man, so you used your death to take revenge on me, right?" Yan Ziyuan was extremely abnormal at this moment. Her cheeks were red, and her body was shivering because of the cold. She bit her red lips so hard that they were bleeding, but her eyes were shockingly bright. "You were wrong first. You didn't tell me that you were not my biological brother. You made me feel abnormal. I tried my best to shift my feelings away from you, so I let myself fall in love with that man. I tried my best to hypnotize myself to fall in love with that man." Ning Xuema was stunned. She seemed to be talking about the matter between Yifeng and Yi Yu. Yan Ziyuan continued as if she was crazy. "I went ashore with him, but I missed you so much that I was scared. I didn't marry that man because I couldn't let you go. I tried my best to escape back to the sea. I wanted to return to your side, even if I had to be your sister forever. I accidentally found out the truth that you were not my brother. I was so happy, angry, and happy at the same time. I swam in the sea like a madwoman." She choked for a moment. "I tried my best to come back. I swam for 3 days and 3 nights without sleep. But you got engaged with another woman. You wanted to marry another woman. You wanted to marry another woman in front of me." I was so angry. I said I wanted to be a human. I asked you to help me beg the sorcerer of the mermaid tribe. You know I'm afraid of pain the most. I thought you wouldn't bear to let me do the operation. But you agreed in the end. Yifeng, do you know how scared I was at that time? How desperate I was. I think you really don't want me anymore." Yan Ziyuan was like an abandoned child. Her voice began to tremble. "During the operation, I was in so much pain. I screamed in pain. I wanted you to come in and see me. But you didn't come. Yifeng, you actually didn't come. I bled so much, I was in so much pain, I cried so much. But you still didn't come. At that time, I was really desperate. I wanted to die. Instead of watching you marry someone else, I'd rather die in that operation. Yifeng, it's all your fault. It's all your fault. I just want to take revenge on you. I want you to watch me marry someone else in this lifetime and become someone else's wife. I will ignore you for the rest of my life. This is your retribution." Retribution. Did you hear that? At that time, I swore that I would never fall in love with you again, that I would never be your sister again. Her voice was intermittent, with one sentence after another. The more Ning Xuemo listened, the more alarmed she became. Yan Ziyuan had really recovered Yi Yu's memories. How could this be? Didn't the twin life curse only remove the curse that Gu Ziyan put on her? Why did it have the ability to recover her previous memories? She looked at Shinjiuli with a questioning gaze. Shinjioli also frowned slightly and transmitted his voice to her. Sharkman's blood has some unexpected miraculous effects. Perhaps her recovery of her previous memories has something to do with the flower absorbing Yifeng's blood. Yifeng loved the sea deeply. If it wasn't for looking for her, he might not have come to the land for the rest of his life. As a result, he died in a foreign land. Ning Xuemo closed her eyes. Okay, I know a path that leads to the sea. Let's go. She was about to step forward and carry Yifeng onto Kirin's back when Yan Ziyuan bent down before her. She struggled to carry Yifeng and moved him out step by step. She was petite and it was already difficult for her to carry Yifeng, let alone carry him. After a few steps, she fell heavily to the ground. Chapter 1081. She was petite and it was already difficult for her to carry Yifeng, let alone carry him. After a few steps, she fell heavily to the ground. Ning Xuema hurriedly helped Yan Ziyuan up. Her knee was already bruised and bleeding, but she didn't seem to feel it. She continued to carry Yifeng and limped out. Ning Xuema couldn't help but say, "Ziyuan, put Yifeng on Little Apple." Yan Ziyuan didn't say anything. She just hugged Yifeng even tighter, as if she was hugging the most important treasure in her life. It was as if she was afraid that someone would take it away from her. They continued to stumble forward. Ning Xuemo and Shinjioli followed behind them. Kirin also followed with drooping ears. In the narrow cave, only Gu Ziyan was left, with his acupoint sealed. He had been left behind. No, he didn't want to be left here. He would die here. Gu Ziyan tried his best to attack the acupoints that Ning Xuemo had casually sealed. He didn't know if it was a coincidence or something else, but the acupoints were unsealed. He was overjoyed and immediately stumbled out. When he finally saw Ning Xuemo and the others, he didn't dare to shout. He just followed them from a distance. Shinjioli seemed to have sensed something. He pursed his lips slightly. Without turning his head, he waved his hand. Gu Ziyan's eyes were wide open and he was completely frozen in place. He was terrified for a moment, but he couldn't shout anymore. He could only watch as the group walked further and further away. After some time, Ning Xuemo and the others finally walked out of the cave and saw the blue sky again. The exit of the cave was an ice cliff. Below the ice cliff was the surging sea. Yan Ziyuan was still holding Yifeng. Her expression was blank as she walked forward. If Ning Xuemo hadn't caught her in time, she would have fallen off the cliff. Yan Ziyuan finally regained her senses. Looking at the undulating waves of the sea below, she slowly revealed a smile and softly said, "Big brother Yifeng, look, the sea." She hugged Yifeng and slowly sat down facing the sea. "Brother Yifeng, you actually want to return to the sea the most, right? Once our shark men leave the water, their bodies will feel very uncomfortable. You have always wanted to go back, right? You're just worried about me, right?" She lowered her eyes and smiled to herself. "Big brother Yifeng, you did everything for me, but I didn't do anything for you. I only know how to be willful in front of you, but I didn't do anything for you. Big brother Yifeng, what do you want me to do the most? Let me do it for you, okay?" Yifeng naturally wouldn't answer her. She hugged Yifeng tightly again. "Big brother Yifeng, tell me. Tell me." Kirin couldn't help but say, "Yifeng wanted you to eat the fish he roasted for you, but you didn't want to eat it. Now you can't eat it even if you want to." Yan Ziyuan's body stiffened. She lowered her head to look at Yifeng in her arms. She seemed to recall the scene when they first arrived. Yifeng really did want to roast fish for her, but she would rather eat that scum's fish than have a taste. Her lips trembled slightly as she pressed her face against Yifeng's cold face. Big brother Yifeng, I'm sorry. Her tears dripped onto Yifeng's face, but she couldn't call him back no matter what. Ning Xuema's chest also felt very stuffy. She didn't say anything else. Yan Ziyuan's sadness was too strong. Letting her cry here was better than keeping it bottled up in her heart. After a while, Yan Ziyuan slowly raised her head and looked at Ning Xuema. Xuema, can you ask Kirin to help me catch another ice crystal fish? Chapter 1082. Ning Xuema nodded and turned to order Kirin, Little Apple, go down and catch an ice crystal fish. The little Qilin nodded its big head. It's not a big deal. Leave it to me. Don't even mention one, even if it's a basket full of them, I can still catch them. It leaped up, and with a splash, it created a big splash of water. Yan Ziyuan hugged Yifeng and looked at the sea with eyes full of longing and reminiscence. There were white birds circling the sea in the distance. The starry sky was bright, the moon was cold, the sea breeze was whistling, and the waves were rolling. There seemed to be a faint song from afar, full of sadness. Ning Xuema stood beside her and wanted to say something, but in the end, she remained silent. At this time, no matter what she said, Yan Ziyuan would not listen. She was completely immersed in her own world. Yifeng's death was a fatal blow to her. It was hard to imagine how she would live in the future. Even if she went back, she would no longer be the innocent Yan Ziyuan. She would be the mermaid Yi Yu who carried the memories of two lives. The little Qilin quickly popped its head out and flew up like a wisp of smoke. It shook violently, and after its scales were once again refreshed, it ran over as if it was asking for credit. Master, master, look, I caught 3 ice crystal fish. Ning Xuema patted Little Apple's big head to encourage it. Little Apple enjoyed it and rubbed its head against her palm. Before it was satisfied, it heard Shinjiuli say lightly, go down and catch your own food. Little Apple felt its body suddenly fly into the air and its whole beast flew out directly. It plunged into the sea like a cannonball. It pulled its head out of the mud for a long time. After it came out, it did not dare to fly up. It opened its mouth and angrily swallowed a big fish that passed by. Yan Ziyuan clumsily handled one of the ice crystal fish. She scraped the scales and removed the internal organs. She was busy for a long time before she finished all these work. In the past, he had seen Yifeng doing it with ease, but now that he was doing it himself, he realized how difficult it was. If he wasn't careful, he would be scraped by the scales. It turned out that big brother Yifeng had done so much for her. It was a pity that she didn't cherish him. Now that he had completely left, it was too late for regrets. Yan Ziyuan closed her eyes. Her tears had already dried up, but the deep sorrow in her heart was like a mass of thick ink that couldn't be dissolved, slowly spreading. The pain was so heavy that she couldn't breathe. In the end, she set up a fire and skewered the fish that was almost processed on a branch. Yan Ziyuan slowly put Yifeng down and let him sit up straight. She snuggled up behind him and hugged Yifeng. She placed the branch with the fish in it into Yifeng's hand. Yifeng's hand was clenched tightly. There seemed to be something in it. Yan Ziyuan silently pried his hands off one by one. It was a piece of the Little Mermaid crystal. She held her breath. The pain in her heart attacked her fiercely. She held the crystal so tightly that her whole body was trembling. Big brother Yifeng, the crystal that she casually picked up and gave to him, was treated like a treasure by him. He always carried it with him. Even when he died, he held it in his hand. His body was full of holes, but this fragile crystal remained intact. It shone with a strange luster under the moonlight. When she was carving Gu Xian's crystal, Yifeng asked her to carve it for him. What did she say at that time? Yes, she asked him to wait. She even slapped him. She didn't expect that after waiting, they would be separated by life and death. Chapter 1083. Yan Ziyuan's heart ached so much that she wanted to dig it out directly. She curled up tightly beside Yifeng. Brother Yifeng. Brother Yifeng. Please forgive me, forgive you. You know she was wrong. Her voice seemed to resonate with the sobbing of the sea at this moment. It was sad and sorrowful, making those who heard it sad and those who heard it cry. Yifeng's body was suddenly swayed by her and was about to fall to the ground. Yan Ziyuan was so scared that she rushed over and lay down before his body fell to the ground. Yifeng fiercely smashed onto her body. She only let out a muffled groan and gently brushed away the snow on Yifeng's body. She slowly helped him up with a head full of cold sweat. She asked softly, Brother Yifeng, did you fall anywhere? Does it hurt? It's all Yu's fault. You shouldn't have fooled around when Brother Yifeng was roasting fish. Brother Yifeng spoils Yu too much. You should teach Yu a lesson at this time. Ning Xuema stood at the side and felt a dull pain in her heart. Yan Ziyuan's mind was obviously not normal again. There was a burnt smell in the air, as if something was being roasted. Ning Xuema saw that the fish had been roasted. She was so distracted that she forgot about the fish for a moment. Yan Ziyuan was also stunned. She stared blankly at the ice crystal fish that was being roasted black in the fire. Suddenly, she rushed forward and reached out to grab the fish. Ning Xuema quickly stopped her. Yan Ziyuan was still struggling desperately and kept reaching out to grab the fish. Looking at her, Ning Xuema's heart suddenly burned with evil fire. She scolded her, Yan Ziyuan, are you crazy? That's spiritual fire. If you put your hand in, your whole arm will be crippled, do you understand? Yifeng risked his life to save you. How can you bear to ruin yourself like this? Yan Ziyuan was stunned by her scolding. After a while, she slowly lowered her head. But that's the fish that Brother Yifeng roasted for me. I can't spoil his good intentions. Ning Xuema was both distressed and angry. Then you're going to ruin yourself like this. Can't you roast another one? Yan Ziyuan suddenly shrank back like an injured hedgehog. Her whole body was trembling. Xuema, don't say any more. I beg you, don't say any more. This fish can't be wasted. Woo-woo, this is the first fish that Brother Yifeng has roasted for me in this lifetime. Ning Xuema closed her eyes and sighed. She extinguished the spiritual fire and waved her hand. The burnt fish flew into Yan Ziyuan's hand. Yan Ziyuan was stunned. Then she smiled happily and lowered her head to eat the fish. The fish was burnt black and gave off an unpleasant burnt smell. There wasn't any seasoning on it, but Yan Ziyuan ate it seriously as if she had found a treasure. As she ate, tears streamed down her face. Her usually sweet voice became slightly hoarse. She seemed to be holding back her surging emotions. She raised her eyes and smiled at Yifeng. It's delicious. It's delicious. Brother Yifeng, you really likes the fish you roasted. Yifeng still looked the same. His eyes were slightly closed, as if he had fallen asleep. Yan Ziyuan held him in her arms and said softly, Brother Yifeng, you is greedy. I want to eat another one. Brother Yifeng, can you roast another fish for you? She started to prepare the second fish. While roasting, she held Yifeng's hand and smiled sweetly. She was like a young girl in love, but her eyes were empty. Chapter 1084. She began to prepare the second fish. While roasting it, she held Yifeng's hand and smiled sweetly, like a girl in love, but her eyes were empty, like a doll that only knew how to smile. Yen Ziyuan once again lowered her head to eat the fish. In fact, she was already full after eating the first fish, but she still ate the second one with a numb expression. She praised while tears streamed down her face. After eating the fish, Yen Ziyuan began to carve the little mermaid crystal with a knife. Under the moonlight, Ning Xuema watched the crystal gradually become clear. In the end, Yen Ziyuan wasn't good at carving, so she accidentally cut herself several times. In the end, when she finished carving the crystal, her hands were also full of scars. The crystal soaked in her blood looked exceptionally beautiful, sparkling and translucent, sparkling under the moonlight. Yen Ziyuan happily picked up the crystal and waved it in front of Yifeng. "Brother Yifeng, look, isn't it beautiful? Doesn't it look like you? Brother Yifeng, as long as you say you want it, you will give it to you immediately." Her voice was lively and sweet, even with a hint of playfulness. Ning Xuema felt like there was a big stone in her heart. It was so heavy that she had nowhere to put it. "Brother Yifeng, I'm just joking with you. Even if you don't say anything, you will definitely give it to you. Everything that you has is yours." Yen Ziyuan's voice was still playful, but her expression was full of pain. "Brother Yifeng, can you talk to you? Even if it's just a sentence." She slowly squatted down. Her heart hurt so much that she wanted to take it out. Yen Ziyuan closed her eyes and slowly waited for the hysterical pain to pass. A gust of wind blew, bringing with it the smell of the salty sea. She supported Yifeng and slowly got up. Everywhere she looked was a sea of blue. There seemed to be a soft sound in the air. "Big brother Yifeng, you love the sea the most, right? At this moment, you must also want to return to the sea." Yen Ziyuan's voice was filled with tenderness, as if she was a wife who was about to send her lover off. "You came here clean, so you must want to go home clean, right? You will help you." Yen Ziyuan scooped up a handful of snow and carefully cleaned the wounds on Yifeng's body. She cleaned very carefully and very slowly, not letting go of any wounds. After a while, her small hands were frozen red and gradually lost feeling. After an unknown amount of time, Yifeng's wound was finally cleaned by her. Yen Ziyuan hugged Yifeng and gradually closed her eyes. She stood on tiptoe and kissed Yifeng's cold lips. This kiss was full of longing, crossing the distance between life and death, crossing the boundary of the river of stars, quietly lingering in this place. At the end of the kiss, Yen Ziyuan's cheeks were slightly red. Her watery eyes seemed to be filled with a sky full of stars, astonishingly bright. She looked at Yifeng affectionately, her eyes full of tenderness, and her lips gradually curved into a smile. She smiled charmingly and innocently, as if an innocent girl who did not know the affairs of the world had finally waited for her true love. She was also like that day under the blue sea, in the dazzling crystal forest, in front of thousands of shark men, little Princess Yiyu's beautiful eyes that could turn all living things upside down. Ning Xuema suddenly had a bad premonition. The strong uneasiness made her want to rush up and grab Yen Ziyuan, but it was already too late. Yen Ziyuan hugged Yifeng and jumped down. The only thing that could be heard in the wind was a sentence that was like a whisper. "Big brother Yifeng, let's go home." Chapter 1085. Ning Xuema did not expect that this trip to the ice field would end up like this. When they arrived, there were 5 of them, but when they returned, only she and the Almighty were left. The sky was filled with red clouds, and her heart was as heavy as the clouds in the sky. If I had known this would happen, I wouldn't have interfered in this matter. This way, Ziyuan wouldn't have died, and Yifeng wouldn't have died. I actually wanted them to be well, but I didn't expect. Ning Xuema had always been straightforward and confident, but now she felt helpless and uncertain. Could it be that it's really because I'm a jinx? No matter who I meddle in, no one will have a good ending. Shinjioli raised his hand and held her in his arms. He said lightly, this ending is the best for them. According to the original fate, Yan Ziyuan and Gu Ziyan would have been married for 10 years. Gu Ziyan would have taken in another concubine, doting on that concubine and completely ignoring her and Rong Yan. He demoted her to a concubine. She was depressed and died of a serious illness. When Yifeng heard about her death, he would have come to avenge her. He fell into Gu Ziyan's trap and was captured. He was given to Lu Hinti as a treasure. Lu Hinti skinned him to make clothes, and his soul was scattered. Ning Xuema was speechless. She did not expect Yifeng and Rong Yan's fate to be so cruel. She sighed slightly. Although their fate was cruel, they still had 10 more years to live. At the very least, Ziyuan will have a good life for a while. Half a year after Yan Ziyuan's marriage, the twin curse was broken. She regretted it, but what was done, and there was nothing she could do. She was always cold to Gu Ziyan. Gu Ziyan was angry, and he only cared about Rong Yan. A year later, Lord Yan died suddenly. Gu Ziyan inherited the position of Lord of Daliang City and made Rong Yan his second wife. Yan Ziyuan was only Gu Ziyan's legal wife in name. Her food and clothing expenses were often deducted by Rong Yan. She was depressed all her life and didn't even get to see Yifeng before she died. The Almighty explained Yan Ziyuan's unaltered fate in more detail. Ning Xuema, from the looks of it, this ending was still better. She pursed her lips. I thought I could change their fates and let them finally obtain happiness. These two people clearly loved each other, but due to a freak combination of factors, they ended up like this. Yifeng loved her so much, but until the moment of his death, he didn't know that Yan Ziyuan loved him. And Yan Ziyuan couldn't tell him anymore. Going against the heavens and changing one's fate doesn't mean that you can change it to the outcome you want. Instead, you can force one's fate into an unknown passageway. As for whether it will be sad or happy, it all depends on the actions of the two people whose fates have been changed. Back then, Yifeng gambled on his fate with Yan Ziyuan. They were not meant to be in this lifetime, but Yan Ziyuan broke the curse when she jumped into the sea with Yifeng in her arms. She and Yifeng will be fated to be in this lifetime. If they know how to seize the opportunity, it's possible that this lifetime's fate will become eternal. You mean, they will come back to life? Ning Xuema's eyes lit up slightly. Shinjioli rubbed his chin on the top of her head and gave her an unfathomable answer. Heaven's secrets are not to be revealed. Ning Xuema. The Almighty was keeping her in suspense again. At this moment, Kirin had already carried them on their return journey. They flew over the deep blue sea under the ice field again. Shinjioli glanced down at the waves. When Yan Ziyuan jumped into the sea with Yifeng in her arms, Ning Xuema subconsciously wanted to jump as well. However, he pulled her back and kicked the stunned Kirin into the sea. Chapter 1086. After Kirin jumped down, it discovered that there was a huge whirlpool at the bottom of the sea that no one dared to approach. It watched as Yan Ziyuan and Yifeng were sucked into the whirlpool. Kirin was inexperienced and did not recognize the huge whirlpool that appeared out of nowhere. However, Shinjioli knew. Ultimate ruin. That was the source of the sea, ultimate ruin. The sinkhole was also the source of life for all marine creatures. If there were no accidents, the two of them would be reborn in ultimate ruin. After all, Yan Ziyuan was forced to reincarnate as a human by the Sea Race Sorcerer's curse. When the curse was broken, she would regain her identity as the Sea Race's Shark Men, and Yifeng would still be the Shark Men. If their obsession with each other was deep enough, their memories of this life would not disappear. Yifeng would still be Yifeng, and Yan Ziyuan would still be the Yan Ziyuan with Yi Yu's memories. However, Yi Feng's fate was changed by Shinjiuli. It was a true heavenly secret. If it was revealed, not only would he be punished by the heavens, the fate of the two of them would change again. Thus, he could not tell Ning Xuemo. In any case, Ning Xuemo only hoped for her good friends to be well. As long as they were happy, everything else was not important. The two of them naturally returned to Buddha Lotus Mountain, and Ning Xuemo met the other disciples of the Sun Moon sect. Ning Xuemo's rapid growth made everyone's jaws drop. They simply did not dare to believe it. Especially Helian Shao, who circled around her 3 times and only had one word left in his mouth: miracle. Miracle. When Ning Xuemo had just entered the ancestors' tutelage, she was still an Earth rank level 2 rookie. In just a short period of 10 days, she had actually advanced to Earth rank level 5 and was about to enter level 6. Not long after Ning Xuemo returned to the Buddha Lotus Mountain, the day of Ji Yunhuang and Tian Shueqing's wedding arrived. Li Hin Ti sent someone to deliver an invitation. When Ning Xuemo saw the invitation, she said indifferently, "I'm not going. Send my blessings to His Highness the Crown Prince and Crown Princess on my behalf. I wish that they can grow old in harmony and love each other until their hair turns white." Then he sent the envoy away. "Didn't you agree to attend Ji Yunhuang's wedding?" Shinjiuli asked as he sipped his tea. After returning to Mount Buddha Lotus, Shinjiuli gave her a few days off so that she could relax. Finally, she became more lively. He thought that she would definitely attend Ji Yunhuang's wedding, but he did not expect that she would choose not to attend. Ning Xuemo was depressed. She sat on a chair and swayed. "Maybe if I don't go, the result will be better." It seemed like the tragedy of Yan Ziyuan Nifeng had traumatized her. Shinjiuli was speechless. He pulled her up. "Come with me." Ning Xuemo stumbled and fell into his arms. She rubbed her eyebrows and looked up. "Where are we going?" "Chongkong country." Shinjiuli spat out these 3 words and took her away. "I'm still a heavenly master there. The Crown Prince's wedding still needs a heavenly master." Ning Xuemo was speechless. She had forgotten that the great master was Han Shangyue. She was still unwilling to go. She broke free from his hand. "Great master, you can go by yourself. I don't need to go." She turned around and was about to return to her side chamber. "I'm going to rest." She did not know why, but she was a little sleepy recently. It was probably because she was too tired from running around for the past few days. Shinjiuli scooped her up in his arms and leaped into the air. "I've told you before that you can't leave my sight at all times. So wherever I go, you can only follow." Chapter 1087. Ning Xuemo felt a bit of a headache. Ever since the great god accepted her as his disciple and said that he would train her day and night, she and the great god had never been separated. They were like conjoined twins. No matter where she went, she could see the great god's figure. This kind of protection was airtight, but it also made her feel a bit breathless. She helplessly supported her forehead in his arms. "Great God, I really think that I should have some private time. We should maintain a bit of distance occasionally." At this moment, Shinjiuli was already flying in the sky with her. He put her on the cloud 2 feet away from him and then slightly closed his eyes. "Well, now there is a distance. You can do whatever you want to do." Ning Xuemo's lips twitched. "Great God, you are strong." Seriously counting the time, Ning Xuemo had left Chongkong country for less than half a year. When she stepped into Marquis Jingyuan's mansion again, she had an illusion that it was a lifetime ago. Everything in Marquis Jingyuan's mansion was still the same. In the few months that she was not here, old Zhong took care of Marquis Jingyuan's mansion in an orderly manner. The servants in the mansion were performing their duties, and it was no different from before she left. When old Zhong saw her, he was so excited that his eyes were filled with tears. When the master and servant met, it was lively. Ning Xuema was originally worried about them, but when she saw them like this, her heart finally relaxed. She suddenly remembered Tom the chastity-testing beast, so she asked old Zhong about it. Old Zhong looked like he wanted to say something but hesitated. After a long time, he said, he went out shopping. He should be back soon. Ning Xuema was flabbergasted. The chastity-testing beast, that kind of monster, went shopping. What if it scared the cats and dogs on the street? Just as she thought about it, a voice sounded from outside, "Old Zhong, come back. I have something delicious to eat. I'm hungry, I'm starving to death." That voice was very strange. It sounded like a foreigner speaking Chinese. The tone was very stiff and awkward. Following the voice, a blonde youth walked in with big strides. High nose, deep eyes, blonde hair, and blue eyes. He was actually a standard Northern European handsome guy. Ning Xuema's heart moved. This is... Could it be? The handsome Caucasian man suddenly saw Ning Xuema sitting at the head of the table and was stunned for a moment. Suddenly, he shouted and rushed over, "Little Xuema." He opened his arms and wanted to give Ning Xuema a bear hug. However, before his arm could touch the corner of Ning Xuema's clothes, he suddenly felt as if a gust of wind had hit him head-on. He staggered back several steps and sat on the ground with a plop. His butt hurt badly from the fall. Fortunately, he was a thick-skinned person. He jumped up from the ground and said, "Which bastard?" Just as he was about to curse, "Which bastard plotted against me?" he suddenly saw Shinjiuli sitting at the head of the table. His gaze was as cold as electricity, so he swallowed back the words he was about to say. Ning Xuema had already stood up. She circled around him and called out tentatively, "Tom." The golden-haired boy was almost in tears. "I am. Xuema, you finally came back. You finally missed your big brother." The golden-haired boy was actually Tom, the chastity-testing beast. Ning Xuema almost couldn't believe it. "Tom, did you repossess another body?" Tom shook his head like a rattledrum. No, I cultivated into a human form." Ning Xuema didn't expect that it could cultivate into a human form in just a few months. It seemed that this child was also a genius. She looked at Tom again. The boy looked to be 14 or 15 years old. His delicate face was still childish. "Is this your face from your previous life?" Ning Xuema wasn't sure. Chapter 1088. Yes. Tom's face was full of pride as he struck a pose. "How is it? Isn't brother handsome?" This sentence was actually very smooth. Ning Xuema snapped her fingers. "Cool." She glanced at him again. "Your Chinese is also not bad." Although he still spoke with a foreign devil's accent, he could at least communicate with people. Tom had been a chastity-testing beast for thousands of years. His internal psychokinesis had already reached the stage of transformation, but he didn't know how to use it and couldn't communicate with people normally, so he had been sullen until now. Later, the books that Ning Xuema gave him were simply gospel to him. He eagerly read and understood. After a few months of closed-door cultivation, he finally found the method to cultivate into a human form. Half a month ago, he finally cultivated into a human form, which almost scared everyone in the Marquis Jingyuan mansion. Although it was difficult for beasts to cultivate into a human form, they could change their appearance as they wished. Therefore, Tom's human form was his appearance from his previous life. After cultivating into a human form, he had always regarded the Marquis Jingyuan mansion as his home. The years of being locked in a cage were his nightmare. Therefore, once he cultivated into a human form, he went out to the streets almost every day to enjoy the joy of freedom. At that time, the only person who could communicate with him and help him cultivate into a human form was Ning Xuemo. He naturally missed her very much. Now that he suddenly saw her return, he was so excited that he didn't know what to do. Once he opened his mouth, it was simply like the power of the yellow river from the sky, unceasing. Even if other people wanted to interrupt, they couldn't. Tom spoke with great delight, and Ning Xuemo was also amused by him to smile frequently. Shinjuli sat there drinking tea and didn't intend to interrupt the two people. After returning from the ice field, Ning Xuemo had been somewhat depressed. Now that she rarely showed a happy face, he naturally wouldn't disturb her. Ning Xuemo and Tom's conversation found that he was very business-minded. In the month that he recovered into a human form, he had already solved several economic crises for the Marquis Jingyuan mansion, and also drove away several of the Ning mansion's best relatives. While they were talking, a faint noise came from outside. After a while, someone came in to report that third Aunt Ning and second young lady Ning were outside the door asking to see Ning Xuemo, Marquis Ning. Ning Xuemo naturally knew who this so-called third Aunt Ning was. She was the one whose arm was bitten off by the chastity-testing beast. He didn't know where this second young Miss Ning came from. Tom snorted. This second young lady Ning is the daughter of third Aunt Ning. Her psychokinesis has reached human rank level 4. She's the one who's spoiled by the whole family. Ning Xuemo understood. Chapter 1089. Ning Shuiying was a 16 or 17-year-old girl. Her features were sharp and she looked a bit like her mother. Her appearance was above average and she could barely be considered a beauty if she was properly groomed. However, the arrogance in her features destroyed her beauty. She also greeted Ning Xuemo with a fake smile. "Little sister Xuemo, I haven't seen you in a few years and you've grown so much." Ning Xuemo had the memories of the original owner. She knew that before Marquis Ning died, Ning Shuiying treated Ning Xuemo quite well. She called her little sister all day long. When Marquis Ning died, she immediately changed her attitude. She scolded Xuemo as trash every day and she lost the face of the Ning clan. She said such words too often. She used the fact that she was a genius to bully the young Ning Xuemo. She even secretly kicked Ning Xuemo off a cliff once. If Ning Xuemo didn't happen to be hanging on a tree, she would have died at that time. Ning Shuiying had not returned home for 2 years. Although she had heard a lot about Ning Xuemo's deeds in her own sect, she still didn't believe that the once cowardly and lowly Ning Xuemo could create such a big wave. She felt that it was just a rumor. Now that she saw Ning Xuemo, she saw that her features were much prettier and her temperament was very different from before. Especially her clothes. They looked simple but they were made of shark silk. A small piece of cloth was worth thousands of gold. It was comparable to all of her belongings. This made her feel unbalanced. She turned her head and her gaze landed on Shinjoli, who had been calmly drinking tea at the side. Her eyes lit up and she walked forward. "This is Celestial Master Han." She couldn't see Shinjoli's face clearly. She only felt that he was very handsome and extraordinary. He was 100 times more handsome than all of her senior and junior brothers combined. Ning Shuiying immediately bowed towards Shinjoli. She purposely softened her tone. "Ning Shuiying greets Celestial Master Han." She still had a soft and pleasant voice, which was described by her fellow disciples as the most enchanting voice. It was very good at seducing men. In the sect, she even used this voice to seduce a martial uncle to prostrate himself under her skirt. She thought that this coquettish bow would attract Master Han to look at her a few times, and then gently allow her to stand up. But the reality was harsh. Master Han didn't even look at her. He was still leisurely sipping his tea. Ning Shuiying bowed there for a long time until her waist was sore, but she still didn't hear the other party say the word remove. For a moment she froze there, not knowing whether to get up or not. Ning Shuima naturally wouldn't help her out. She just crossed her arms and watched. She was happy to watch the show. Third Aunt Ning loved her daughter dearly and hurriedly used other words to help her daughter out. Shuiying, come here. You haven't been close to your younger sister Shuima for a long time. You two have a good chat. Ning Shuiying took the opportunity to get up and walk over. I heard that younger sister Shuima has become the Overlord's disciple. Congratulations, congratulations. She said congratulations, but her eyes were full of jealousy. Ning Shuima lightly replied, well said, well said. She didn't feel like exchanging pleasantries with the mother and daughter. What brings you here? Third Aunt Ning exclaimed, Shuima, third aunt and your second sister came specially to see you. We are a family, so we should be intimate. Shuima, now that you have become the Overlord's disciple, you are the glory of the entire Ning family. Chapter 1090. Shuima, you don't know this, but when you succeeded in becoming his disciple, the entire Ning family was overjoyed. They set off firecrackers for several days and held banquets for several days. Shuima, we're family. Now that you've flown to a higher branch, don't forget to support your family. Your sister Shuiying also wants to enter the Sun-Moon sect, and it's best if she can also become the ancestor's disciple. That way, you two sisters will have each other's company, right? Why don't you plead with the ancestor and ask him to accept Shuiying? Ning Shuima knew that this mother and daughter pair must have come with a request, but she didn't expect that they would actually ask for this. She almost couldn't help but want to laugh. Before she could open her mouth, Tom, who was beside her, burst out laughing. You're just picking up scraps. Do you think the ancestor is? What kind of Tom, Dick, and Harry want to become his disciple? Ning Shuiying's expression changed, and she fiercely glared at Tom. She should have suffered some kind of loss from Tom, so she didn't dare to get angry after being ridiculed by him. She only sneered. To put it bluntly, Sister Shuima's psychokinesis is still trash, but didn't you also become the ancestor's disciple? This little girl has already cultivated to the 5th rank of the human step, and is known as a genius. The 5th rank of the human step is also called a genius. Tom couldn't help but laugh. The frog at the bottom of the well is short-sighted. He spoke these few sentences in Chinese, and unexpectedly, he didn't say anything wrong. Ning Shuima lazily said, Uncle Zhong, see the guests out. Ning Shuiying steeled her heart and stared at Ning Shuima. Sister Shuima, did you become angry from embarrassment after hearing sister speak the truth? Then sister will apologize to sister. She said that, but she didn't have the slightest intention of apologizing. She took another step forward and reached out to hold Ning Shuima's hand. Little sister, we haven't been close for a long time. Ning Shuima didn't dodge. Ning Shuiying's fingers were grabbing Ning Shuima's wrist. She suddenly channeled her psyche power, and her 5 fingers were like 5 iron claws, trying to pinch Ning Shuima's pulse. She wanted to make Ning Shuima cry like a ghost and make her lose face. However, she did not expect that as soon as she exerted strength in her fingers, she would feel the psychokinesis in her body rushing towards the other party. She could not stop it even if she wanted to. The other party was absorbing her psychokinesis. Ning Shuiying's expression changed drastically. She hurriedly tried to withdraw her hand, but her fingers seemed to be stuck to the other party's wrist. She couldn't withdraw her hand at all. Outsiders only saw her and Ning Shuima holding each other's wrists intimately. How could they know her pain? Third Aunt Ning thought that her daughter had the upper hand. Her old face was full of pride. She stole a glance at Shinjuli's expression. Shinjuli was still expressionless. It was as if he turned a blind eye to this scene. Third Aunt Ning mocked Ning Xuemo in her heart. A concubine was a concubine. She would not be noticed by the high and mighty Celestial Master Han. Even if she was at a disadvantage, Celestial Master Han couldn't be bothered to care. Ning Xuemo was just a good-looking girl. After all, she was a good-for-nothing and a jinx. It was understandable that Celestial Master Han didn't care about her. If her daughter married him, with her ability to attract men, Celestial Master Han would definitely dote on her. Third Aunt Ning stood there. Before she could finish her daydream, she suddenly heard a muffled groan. She subconsciously raised her head and saw her daughter suddenly fly out like a rag. With a bang, she stuck to the wall and fell to the ground with a scream, swaying. Third Aunt Ning panicked and rushed over to help her daughter up. Chapter 1091. Ning Shuiying also struggled on the ground, trying to get up. She did not expect that as soon as she lifted her upper body, her body would soften and she would fall to the ground again. Her forehead hit the ground heavily. Third Aunt Ning was speechless. Ning Shuiying's forehead was bruised. She tried hard to get up again, but her waist went soft again. She kowtowed again. Just like that, she kowtowed 3 times in a row, until a big bruise appeared on her forehead. Only then did she manage to get up. Ning Xuemo smiled lazily. Why do you have to change from arrogance to deference? We're sisters, you don't have to apologize so much. Ning Shuiying was speechless. Ning Xuemo gestured to Uncle Zhong and ordered, send the guests out. Ning Shuiying's face was pale. She could feel that all the strength in her body had been drained. She could not find any psychokinesis in her body. In other words, she had lost all her psychokinesis. She had become a useless person. She widened her eyes and stared at Ning Xuemo. You. What kind of sorcery did you use? Ning Xuemo glanced at her coldly. You dare to call the Sun-Moon sex sorcery a sorcery? Ning Shuiying was speechless. Uncle Zhong had long found this mother and daughter pair unpleasing to his eyes. In the past few months when Ning Xuemo wasn't around, this mother and daughter pair had visited the Zhong residence many times. They wanted to take advantage of the Zhong residence, but after being rudely chased away by Tom several times, they finally calmed down. Third Aunt Ning did not know what had happened. She only knew that her daughter had suffered a great loss in the hands of Ning Xuemo. She hated it in her heart. Now that this little bitch had taken the ancestor as her master, her martial arts must have improved. They could not afford to offend her anymore. She was more sensible. She knew that it would not be good to offend Ning Shuiying at this time, so she took a step back. Xuemo, you're now Marquis Ning. You're also Celestial Master Han's disciple and the ancestor's disciple. You can be considered glorious. You can't forget your roots and our Ning family. After all, the Ning family's blood flows in your body. You have to help our Ning family. Now that you're not at home all year round, we can't let an outsider take care of the Ning residence. How about this, you hand the Ning residence to us. We promise to take good care of it for you. It turned out that they were eyeing the entire Ning mansion's wealth. Ning Xuemo smiled and tilted her head to look at her. You want to take care of the Ning mansion? Yes, your third aunt is good at taking care of the family. Third Aunt Ning almost puffed out her chest. Is your face that big? Ning Xuemo added in disdain. Third Aunt Ning was speechless. Ning Xuemo took another sip of tea and said indifferently, the family business in this residence was earned by me, Ning Xuemo. It has nothing to do with the Ning family. Tom, from today onwards, the Ning mansion will be handed over to you. In the future, if any Tom, Dick, or Harry claims to be your relative, feel free to kick them out. Tom was stunned. He glanced at Ning Shuima and immediately replied, okay. Third Aunt Ning jumped up like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. What? You want to give the Ning mansion to an outsider? No. No. The whole Ning family won't agree. Before she could finish, Ning Shuima looked at Tom with a faint smile. Tom, someone is shouting in your house. Tom's handsome face tightened. He lifted Third Aunt Ning up with one hand like a chick. Get lost. Then, Third Aunt Ning was thrown out by Tom like a ball. Third Aunt Ning flew through the air and howled, "Ah, ah, 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 help, mother." Ning Shuiying screamed and rushed out. Chapter 1092. The annoying flies were finally driven out. Ning Shuima believed that they would never come again. As for Ning Shuiying, she had already become a real waste. She would also taste the pain that Ning Shuima had experienced in the past. In the future, Ning Shuima would not have many opportunities to return to the Ning residence. It was unreasonable for the Ning residents to be without a master all year round. After a long time, it would be easy to be targeted by people with ulterior motives. It was better to give it to Tom, who had no relatives or friends. This fellow was a genius in business. She believed that the Ning residents would be able to flourish in his hands. However, Tom was after all a beast who had cultivated into a human. He had to find a proper identity so that he could stay in peace. Ning Shuima had an idea. She asked Tom to change his surname to Ning and let him stay as Marquis Ning's adopted son. This way, it would be proper for him to inherit the Ning residence. Tom originally had no parents in this era. Now that he could have a normal identity, he was naturally willing. He even gave himself the name Ning Tianyu. Ning Shuima simply brought him to the government and registered him as a permanent resident. She had a special identity now. The Ministry of Revenue naturally would not make things difficult for her. They happily registered Ning Tianyu and made him a real member of the Ning residence. The news of Master Han's return was like a bird with wings, spreading in the capital. Lu Hin-ti naturally also received the news. He immediately led the civil and military officials to welcome him. Ning Shuima originally did not want to meet Lu Hin-ti and the others with the Almighty. However, Shinjiuli directly kept her by his side, saying that he did not want her to leave his sight. Therefore, she could only sit with him in the hall of the Taoist master residence. When she saw Lu Hin-ti and the others, they came to greet her. Ji Yunhao actually came too. After not seeing him for half a year, he seemed to have lost a lot of weight. He also seemed to have calmed down a lot. He stood in the hall and greeted Shinjiuli. His gaze fell on Ning Shuima, faintly complicated. This girl used to be his fiancée. He mistook her for trash and threw her away. When he realized her good points, she could no longer return to his side. He missed it. What had he missed? After all, he was a playboy who often mingled in romantic situations, so he was quite good at judging women. He could tell at a glance that Ning Shuima was still a virgin. Master Han did not consummate their marriage. A glimmer of hope suddenly rose in his heart. Perhaps he still had a chance. After he finished paying his respects, he finally couldn't help but ask, "Will Great Master still let Shui Miss Ning be a concubine?" Ning Shuima's heart skipped a beat. What was her position in the Almighty's heart? She had already removed her status as a concubine, so what kind of status did the Almighty want her to have? Ning Shuima's gaze also shifted to the great god, wanting to see how he would respond. Shinjiuli didn't even glance at Ji Yunhao. Of course, he also ignored his question. Ji Yunhao didn't dare to ask again after being snubbed. A servant reported from outside, His Highness the Crown Prince has come to pay his respects. Ning Xuema's expression changed. Tomorrow was Ji Yunhuang's wedding. She did not expect that he would still have the time to visit the Celestial Master residence. A moment later, Ji Yunhuang came in. He actually didn't come alone. There was a young girl beside him, a young girl around 12 or 13 years old. That young girl had a pair of lively eyes, a high nose, and full cherry red lips. When she looked at people, she tilted her head slightly. She was very cute. Ji Yunhuang held the girl's hand and walked in. He respectfully cupped his hands toward Shinjuli. He even pulled the girl beside him. Shui Mo, this is the Celestial Master Han that I often mention to you. Quickly come and pay your respects. Chapter 1093. The girl naturally went forward to greet him. Even a blind person could see how much he cared for the girl. Shinjuli's eyes darkened slightly, but he did not say anything. Ning Xuema's heart sank. Tomorrow was Ji Yunhuang and Tian Shueching's wedding. Why did Ji Yunhuang bring another girl to greet them today? While she was pondering, Ji Yunhuang had already greeted her. Martial Aunt Xuema, long time no see. How have you been? Ning Xuema looked at Ji Yunhuang. Ji Yunhuang did not look any different from when she had met him on the mountain. His eyes were slightly lowered, and she could not see his state of mind. He had always known how to hide his emotions, and now he was even more profound. His face was as calm as water, and it was hard for others to see any fluctuations in his emotions. Ning Xuema exchanged a few words with him, and her gaze fell on the girl beside him. She did not know why, but she felt that this girl seemed a little familiar, but she could not remember where she had seen her before. Especially when she tilted her head to look at people, it gave her an indescribable sense of familiarity. Greetings to Martial Aunt Ning. The girl greeted her cheerfully. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat, and she looked at Ji Yunhuang. Sun Moon sect's rules state that non-disciples cannot address each other as martial aunt or senior brother, unless that person is a family member of a Sun Moon sect disciple. Ji Yunhuang smiled. Don't worry, Yunhuang does not dare to break the sect's rules. Shui Mo is Yunhuang's future Zhao Yi. Ning Xuema's fingers that were holding the teacup tightened slightly, and Tian Shueching's figure suddenly flashed in her mind. She suddenly understood everything. Tian Shueching was forcefully given to Ji Yunhuang by the great god. Ji Yunhuang was afraid that the great god had a knot in his heart because of this, so he purposely brought another girl to greet the great god. This was equivalent to making the great god unhappy. Ning Xuema could not help but look at Shinjuli. Shinjuli sat there indifferently, as calm as before, without any reaction. However, this was within Ning Xuema's expectations. The Almighty was a calm emperor, and it was extremely difficult to see any changes in his expression. Ning Xuema looked at Lu Hinti again. Lu Hinti obviously knew about it. He only looked at his son disapprovingly and didn't say anything. Ji Yunhuang doted on the girl called Shui Mo. From time to time, he would hold her hand and look at her with a gentle gaze. The crown prince's wedding was not a small matter. There were many complicated procedures involved. Lu Hinti naturally asked Han Shangyue to preside over the wedding ceremony for Ji Yunhuang. Shinjuli's gaze landed on Ji Yunhuang's body. He opened his mouth and spoke a few words that sounded like a Buddhist hymn. When I do things, I don't do it by chance. I'm just going with the flow. Don't lose yourself. Ji Yunhuang stared blankly for a moment before he smiled faintly. Heavenly teacher, I will definitely remember your wondrous words. However, he laughed coldly in his heart. This person had snatched away the person he loved and forced another person onto him. Why did he say something like a Buddhist hymn? It was nothing more than letting him follow the will of the heavens and accept his fate. Shinjioli looked at him for a moment and did not say anything else. The meeting ended with everyone having their own thoughts. The moon in the sky was as big as a round plate. A few wisps of white clouds floated in the sky, occasionally covering half of the moon's face. In the small pavilion, the chess moves on the chessboard were slightly messy. Shinjioli stood in the small pavilion with his back facing the body. He looked up at the moon in the sky and seemed to be lost in thought. When Ning Xuemo finished bathing and came out, she saw such a scene. Did he have something on his mind? Ning Xuemo walked to the chess table and looked at it. This game of chess was not at the level of the Almighty.